Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. We were night fishing at Lake Edgerton, me and my cousin, Neil. This was late September, right after that first cold snap when the mosquitoes die off, but the water's still warm enough for bass to bite. We'd pulled up to our usual spot a little after 8, set up the rods, cracked a couple beers. No big plan, just killing time. The lake's pretty big but shallow, with thick pine woods surrounding most of it. We were on the south side, the bank that slopes into reeds. We parked Neil's truck on the gravel pull-off and hiked maybe 20 yards to a little open stretch by the water. It's not a campsite, just a gap in the trees where someone dragged in a log to sit on. We've been using it for years. It was around 10:30 when we saw it. We'd been sitting for maybe an hour and a half, chatting on and off, mostly quiet. The air was still. No wind, no boat noise, no animals. Pretty normal for that time of night, actually. Just crickets and the occasional splash out in the dark. Neil was messing with his reel when I noticed this glow through the trees on the other side of the lake. I thought it was the moon at first. It was that kind of soft, white-blue light, a little hazy. But then I looked up and saw the actual moon behind us, almost full and high in the sky. So whatever this was, it wasn't that. I tapped Neil and pointed. We both just watched it for a while, not saying anything. It looked like a big, faint orb, probably the size of a water tower from where we were. At first it seemed stationary, just hovering above the tree line across the lake. But the longer we stared, the more it became clear it was moving, slowly, almost lazily, drifting downward. It didn't cast shadows or ripple the water. There was no sound at all, just that glow behind the trees, dropping an inch at a time. Neil whispered, "What the hell is that?" I didn't have an answer. It wasn't bright enough to hurt our eyes, but it had this strange presence to it, like it didn't belong in the sky, or even in the world. Not a spotlight, not a flare. Too slow and smooth for a drone, and it didn't blink like aircraft do. Just this perfect round shape of light, dim but defined. We watched it descend until it touched the treetops. Then it stopped, just hovered there, maybe 10 feet above the pines. I remember trying to listen harder to see if I could catch some distant hum or engine or even animals reacting. But there was nothing. The crickets had gone quiet. The lake was still, not even a breeze in the reeds. Then it sank, straight down behind the trees. No wobble, no drift, just a slow vertical drop until it disappeared, gone like it had never been there. And right after, the light on the water vanished too. Neil stood up and said, "We should go." He didn't sound scared, just unsettled. I felt it too. Not panic, just that instinct to leave. Like when you realize a thunderstorm is a lot closer than you thought and you're holding a metal rod. Nothing had technically happened, but we didn't want to be out there anymore. We packed up fast, not running, not talking, just tossing gear into the backpacks, making sure we didn't leave trash. Neil carried the tackle box, I grabbed the rods. The walk back to the truck felt longer than it should have. I kept glancing behind us, into the trees, not really sure what I was looking for. The moon was still out, but everything felt darker somehow. Less color. We got to the truck and both just stood there for a second before getting in. Neil asked if I wanted to sleep in the cab or just head home. I said, "Let's drive." About 15 minutes into the drive, 2-lane road, no traffic, the dash lights flickered. Just for a second. Then the radio cut out and the headlights dimmed like the battery was dying. Neil smacked the dash and everything came back. He laughed it off, but he looked at me with this weird expression, like he was waiting for me to say something first. The rest of the ride was quiet. We didn't talk much about it until the next day. When I brought it up again, Neil told me he'd seen something like it before, once, when he was younger, fishing with his dad out near that same lake. He said he hadn't thought about it in years. Same kind of light, same kind of movement. Just a soft ball of glow that hovered for a while, then sank into the woods without a trace. I asked why he never told me. He just shrugged and said, "It didn't seem real, I guess." That stuck with me, because that's exactly how this felt. Not like a dream, not like a story. Just something that was and then wasn't. I went back to that spot a few weeks later, in the daytime, just to see. The trees across the lake looked the same. No burn marks, no flattened brush. Nothing unusual. I even walked around the far side, through the woods where the light had disappeared. It was muddy, full of leaves and thorns. I didn't find tracks or damage. No signs anyone else had even been out there recently. I haven't been night fishing since. Not because I'm scared, exactly. I just haven't felt like it. We never saw it again. I was working the north section of the preserve doing winter trail checks. It was mid-January, and most of the park was closed to the public that time of year. Just a few hardcore snowshoers and backcountry campers here and there, but otherwise dead quiet. The temperature had dropped to about -10 overnight, and even the elk were scarce. My shift started before sunrise, like usual. I had a thermos of coffee and the truck heater on full blast, driving slowly along the service road that skirts around Thompson Lake. That's the one-way up near the tree line, almost always frozen solid from December through March. Not much wind that morning, just dry, biting cold, and a pale pink glow starting to form behind the ridge. I stopped the truck near one of the pull-offs overlooking the lake and stepped out to take a look around. No tracks in the snow, not even rabbit or coyote. Just a thick white sheet across everything. I scanned the trees with binoculars for movement and then glanced out toward the lake. There was something above the ice, not on it, above it, hovering maybe 10 or 15 feet up, just sitting there in the air. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. Sometimes the fog rises weird off the lake, especially around dawn. But this wasn't fog. It wasn't moving or drifting. It was a solid shape, oval or disc-like. I couldn't tell exactly from that angle. And metallic, or at least it looked metallic. It caught just enough of the early light to reflect a faint glint, like brushed aluminum. No lights, no sound, no markings, just hanging in the air maybe 50 yards from the shore. I stayed completely still for a few seconds, just watching it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't wobble or shift. It didn't rise or fall. It was like someone had pressed pause on a drone mid-flight, except there was no humming, no buzzing, nothing, just total silence. I walked slowly down the slope toward the edge of the lake. The snow was knee-deep in places, untouched. As I moved, I kept expecting the thing to take off or blink out or change somehow, but it didn't. It just stayed right there, floating above the ice. I got about 20 feet from the edge of the lake, close enough that I could make out a subtle ripple of distortion around the edges of the thing, like heat rising off pavement, except it was sub-zero out. The air looked off, like the light behind it didn't bend quite right. I raised the binoculars again, but before I could even adjust the focus, it was gone. Not gone like it sped off, gone like it had never been there. 1 second it was hanging there above the lake, and the next it wasn't. No sound, no motion trail, no breeze, just empty air and open ice. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it would reappear or if maybe I'd catch movement elsewhere. Nothing, just quiet and cold. The trees on the far side of the lake didn't even sway. I figured maybe it had been a drone. Some new kind I didn't recognize. Could have been from one of the research teams that passed through. But even drones leave sound, or at least some kind of mechanical presence. This had none of that. After a few minutes, I stepped out onto the lake. The ice was thick, at least 8 inches, probably more. I've been walking that lake every winter for years. I know what bad ice looks like. This wasn't that. I walked to the exact spot where the thing had been floating above. No cracks, no frost patterns, no melted patches, no impact, just flat, solid ice like it had been undisturbed all season. That was the weirdest part. If anything had hovered that low for that long, even just from engine heat or exhaust, I should have seen something. A frost ring, a thin spot, even a dusting blown off. But there was nothing, like the ice had been untouched. The snow on the surface around it was still perfect too. No sign anything had displaced air or disturbed the powder. I crouched down and brushed some of the snow away with my glove. Ran my hand over the surface. Cold, solid, clean. Then I noticed my radio wasn't working. I carry a standard issue 2-way. Works fine in the mountains, even through dense tree cover. But when I pressed the mic to check in with dispatch, I just got static. No signal bars. I turned it off and back on. Same thing. I tried my phone, it wouldn't even unlock at first. Then when it did, the clock had reset to 12 a.m. and the screen started lagging like crazy. Then it shut off entirely. Full battery too. I backed off the lake and hiked back to the truck, which I'd left idling. When I got in, I checked the dashboard clock. It read 7:14, which seemed about right. But when I turned the radio on, the entire display blinked a few times and then just went black. The engine was still running fine, but all the electronics were glitching. I sat there for a minute, trying to think through it logically, but the more I tried to make sense of it, the less sense it made. I drove back toward the ranger station, slow, since I didn't trust any of the systems. Halfway down the trail, the radio kicked back on like nothing had happened. Full reception. Phone started working too. Clock was still off though, off by exactly 20 minutes. When I got back, I logged the morning as routine. Didn't mention the object, didn't mention the electronics, just put down a note about an unconfirmed visual anomaly over Thompson Lake and left it at that. Later that week, I went back out there, same time of day. Conditions were identical. I brought a thermal scope and checked the lake from every angle. Nothing. No object, no radio interference, no power issues. Just wind and snow and elk prints near the edge. I stood in the same spot on the ice, the one I'd walked to before, and stared out at the tree line. Tried to recreate the moment, see if there was anything reflective, any wires or camera equipment I'd missed. Still nothing. I've worked that park 10 years. Seen weird stuff. Lights over ridges, hikers reporting strange sounds, even found a radio tower that somehow turned itself back on after being decommissioned. But nothing like that morning. Nothing that close. Nothing that quiet. I still check the lake when I'm up that way just out of habit. Same patch, same view. Always early morning just before the sun breaks over the ridge. Hasn't shown again. I was driving east on Route 62 through the Mojave late one night, headed toward 29 Palms. It was past midnight, and I hadn't passed another car in at least an hour. The desert was just pitch black in every direction except for what my headlights caught. Flat scrub, a 2-lane road, and the occasional road sign that looked like it'd been there since the 60s. I wasn't in any hurry, so I was cruising maybe 5 over the limit, just sipping warm coffee from a thermos and letting my thoughts drift. The kind of headspace you get into when you're alone and it's too late to be up. I remember the air outside was completely still. No wind, no movement. It felt like the whole desert had gone to sleep. A little after mile marker 128, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, just off to the left of the highway. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe something on my windshield or a glare from the dash lights. But it wasn't. There were 3 faint white lights, maybe a few hundred feet off the road, arranged in a perfect triangle. 2 in front, 1 behind. They were hovering low, definitely below the mountains in the distance, and they were moving, pacing me. I slowed down a little, thinking it might be a plane banking toward the small airstrip out here, or maybe even a drone. But the lights didn't get any closer. They adjusted when I slowed down. When I sped up again, they stayed perfectly in line. Always at the same distance, same angle, just barely outside the reach of my headlights. It wasn't bright. The lights were dim, like halogen bulbs under foggy glass, and they didn't waver or flicker. No color, just steady, pale white. The kind of glow you see in an overcast city sky, but with no clouds and no city. I rolled down the driver's side window and leaned out a bit to listen, thinking maybe I could hear rotor blades or an engine. Nothing. Not even the low hum you get from highway power lines. Just the crunch of tires on the road and a faint whistle from the wind. Whatever it was dead silent. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see taillights behind me or some sign that I wasn't totally alone out there, but the road stayed empty. The longer I drove, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't doing anything aggressive, wasn't flashing or moving in erratic ways. It was just there, keeping pace, like it was watching or waiting. I told myself it was probably a military thing. 29 Palms has a base and they run exercises at night. but I'd lived out here long enough to know what helicopters and jets look and sound like. This wasn't that. There were no strobes, no red or green markers, no noise, and it never changed altitude. It just glided along, smooth as glass. At one point, around mile 135, I turned off my headlights real quick, just flicked them off for a second. My brights had been catching dust in the air, and I thought maybe I was fooling myself somehow. But even with the lights off, I could still see those 3 white dots hovering low in the dark. I clicked the lights back on fast. I don't know why. I wasn't scared exactly, but something about seeing them still there in the black with no road or frame of reference made me feel exposed. I slowed down to a crawl and pulled off onto a wide patch of dirt shoulder. When I stopped, so did the lights. Just stopped. Still hovering, still glowing faintly in that same triangle, not moving a foot closer or further. I shut the engine off and got out of the car. The desert was quiet as hell. The kind of silence where your ears ring from the absence of sound. The sky was full of stars, and for a second I lost the lights in the background. But then I saw them again. Same spot, same formation. Hovering maybe 50 feet off the ground, dead still. I stood there waiting for something. A shift. A sound, anything. But they just stayed right there. I took a few steps toward them, but the moment I moved off the gravel shoulder and onto the desert scrub, the lights slowly started to glide sideways, keeping their formation, always at the same angle, just drifting to the left like they were on an invisible rail. I stopped walking. The lights stopped drifting. That's when I noticed the animals, or rather, the lack of them. Usually out there you hear coyotes, insects, the occasional rustle in the brush. Nothing. It was like the whole area around the lights had gone into some kind of stasis. I didn't even hear the wind anymore. I backed toward the car and got in. Started it up, pulled back onto the highway. The lights followed, like before, never gaining, never retreating. I watched them out the window, then in the mirror, then out the passenger side when they glided over to the right side of the road. At some point, I passed a cluster of old trailers and shacks, maybe a dozen of them, all dark. That area always creeped me out, even in the daytime. When I glanced over at the buildings, the lights blinked out, just gone. No fade, no streak, no change in position. One second they were pacing me, the next they weren't there. I pulled over again and waited. Got out, walked around the car, scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just desert and stars. I kept driving, slower now, watching the sky and the scrub. I made it to 29 Palms around 2 a.m., pulled into a gas station just to stand under the lights for a bit to hear something human. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Didn't report it. What would I say? There were no markings, no details I could draw. Just 3 white lights, a triangle in the dark, moving silently beside me for 10 miles like it knew exactly how fast I was going. Whatever it was, I didn't see it land, didn't see it leave. It was just there. Then it wasn't. We heard it first before we saw anything. It was this low hum, kind of like the sound a transformer makes when it's running too hot, but way deeper and more constant. It started right after dinner, sometime around 8:30, and it wasn't loud exactly, more like something you could feel in your chest if you stopped paying attention for a moment. It wasn't coming from the road or the fields, at least not that we could tell, just this hum drifting over the farm. My wife, Jess, was the first to notice it. She was wiping down the kitchen table when she stopped, looked out the window, and said, "Do you hear that?" I said yeah, but figured it was just the wind or maybe a plane somewhere far off. We both stepped outside to see if we could spot something. Our farmhouse sits by itself, with the barn a little ways behind it. The sky was clear, stars out in full force, no clouds, no planes, no helicopters, no blinking lights, nothing. Just silence apart from that hum. The thing is, the hum moved slowly over us, like it was gliding along the ground or just above it. That's when things started to get weird. I glanced over at the barn and saw the shadows cast by the floodlights out there. Normally, with lights pointing in different directions, the shadows from the barn's beams and the nearby trees all stretch out differently. But this time, every shadow, whether from the trees, the barn, or even the fence posts, was pointing exactly the same way toward the northwest corner of the property. It was subtle, but it was like someone had turned all the lights to face the same way without touching a thing. Jess noticed it too and said, "That's not right." We stood there for a minute, just staring, but we couldn't figure out what could have done that. The hum stopped after maybe a minute, and when it did, the shadows just went back to normal like someone flipped a switch, except we didn't see anyone. I looked all around, walking the perimeter of the barn, but there was no one there. No cars, no trucks, no lights or movement in the trees. Just the usual night sounds, crickets and owl hooting off in the distance. Jess was getting a little nervous, so I tried to shrug it off. "Maybe some kind of electrical thing," I said. "Transformer or something on the line." We have a power pole about 100 yards away, and sometimes those transformers hum. But I'd never heard one like that, and the way the shadows all shifted just didn't add up. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing this faint humming sound in my head, like it was stuck there. I told Jess to keep her phone close, just in case. The next morning, I went out to check the barn. The floodlights all worked fine, and the shadows were normal. Nothing seemed out of place. I looked for signs of anything unusual, tracks, marks on the ground, broken branches, but the dirt was dry and undisturbed. That day, I asked a neighbor if he heard anything, but he said no. No hum, no strange shadows, nothing. It felt like whatever it was, it only happened here, and only for a moment. Over the next couple of days, small weird things kept happening. My dog, Sam, who's usually calm, wouldn't go near the barn after dark. He'd growl and stare out toward the northwest corner, like he could see something I couldn't. Jess said she felt watched whenever she hung laundry in the backyard. I started locking the doors earlier than usual and double-checking the windows at night. One evening, I was out by the barn again, fixing a loose board, when I heard it. A low tapping, very faint, like someone knocking on metal. It wasn't steady, more like irregular taps, but it came from behind the barn, where there's nothing but some old equipment and storage. I called Jess out to listen, but as soon as she turned on her flashlight and shone it that way, the tapping stopped. We looked all around, but there was nothing. No signs anyone had been there. No footprints, no moved objects. That night, I tried recording the area with my phone, hoping to catch something, anything. But the recording only picked up the usual night sounds. No hum, no tapping, no weird noises. When I played it back, the audio was clean. Still, I felt uneasy, the sense that something was just beyond the edge of sight, watching, waiting. On the third night, we both heard the hum again. It came on slowly, building up like a distant engine revving, but this time it was louder, and the whole house vibrated a little with it. I went outside, flashlight in hand, and watched the shadows again. Sure enough, all the shadows pointed the same way, the northwest corner. I stepped closer to where the shadows were stretching. The air felt colder, heavier. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the night itself was thicker there. Jess stayed inside, but I walked over, shining my light around the trees and old tractor parts. There was nothing there. The hum faded again, and the shadows fell back to normal. The silence came rushing back with it, but I stood there for a long minute, feeling exposed in the dark. After that, we kept an eye on the place. The hum never came back again, and the shadows stayed normal. But every time I walked by that northwest corner after dark, I felt like something was just barely out of sight. Something that didn't want me to notice. I've tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was some weird power line and interference or a natural thing I don't understand. But it wasn't natural. I know that much. Still, I have no idea what it was or why it happened. All I know is that it left this quiet feeling hanging over the farm. Like something watched us for a moment and then decided to disappear. I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning, though I only figured that out later. My watch wasn't working when I checked it. Neither was my phone. I tapped the screen a couple times, held the power button, nothing. No low battery warning, no flicker. It was like the battery had just disappeared. Same thing with my headlamp when I tried to turn it on. No light, even though I'd put fresh batteries in before the trip. That was the first thing that felt off. The second was how quiet it was. I've been camping solo for years. I know how the woods get at night, sometimes loud, sometimes calm, but never silent. There's always something. Wind through the trees, a branch creaking, bugs, distant owls, even your own breathing. But when I sat up in my sleeping bag, I realized there was nothing. Not a sound. It was like someone had hit mute on the entire forest. I unzipped the tent flap slowly. I didn't even have a flashlight at that point, so I just used the moonlight, but when I looked up, the sky was full of stars, bright and clear, no cloud cover at all. But something about them was wrong. I don't know constellations well enough to name more than the obvious ones. Orion, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia maybe. But I stared up and none of them were where they should have been. The whole sky looked like it had shifted, not rotated, not obscured, just rearranged, like someone had taken the stars and shuffled them. Some looked way too close together, others too far apart. I remember thinking the sky looked too tight, like the stars had been pulled inward somehow. I stepped outside barefoot, forgetting how cold the ground was. The air wasn't freezing, but it had that dry, brittle feel, like it does right before a hard frost. The fire I'd made earlier was long dead, just blackened coals and a few unburnt logs, but even those felt weirdly cold when I got close. I reached down to touch one and pulled my hand back fast. Not because it burned, because it was colder than the ground, like it had been packed in ice. I walked out from the clearing and stood at the tree line, looking into the woods. Still no sound. I even clapped my hands once, just to break the silence. It echoed slightly, way more than it should have for how close the trees were. The sound bounced back a second later, dull and warped, like it had gone out into a huge empty room before coming back. That's when I noticed the shadows were wrong. The moon wasn't behind me, but the trees in front of me were casting shadows toward me, like there was another light source somewhere deeper in the woods. I turned around thinking maybe someone else had shown up, maybe a late hiker or someone messing around with a drone light, but there was nothing behind me. No beam, no glow, just the clearing, the dark tent, and the sky that didn't look like the sky. I stood there for maybe a minute or two, then walked back to the tent and grabbed my backup flashlight. It's one of those wind-up ones with the crank, no batteries. I figured at least that would work. I cranked it for a good 30 seconds, but when I flicked it on, nothing happened. It was like the bulb wasn't there. I opened it up to check the connection, and everything looked fine. I even swapped out the bulb from my lantern just to see. Still nothing. I tried the lantern next. Button-powered, runs on C batteries. No response. I pulled the batteries out and held them in my hand, trying to see if they were warm. They felt room temp. Not dead, not drained, just blank. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like all my gear had been turned off in a way that didn't make sense. Not fried, not broken, just neutralized. I started to feel uneasy then, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Not scared exactly, not yet. But the kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room and realize someone's been going through your stuff. Something subtle but wrong, and you can't point to a single thing. The wind started up about 15 minutes later, or at least I thought it was wind. It made the trees sway a little, but there was no sound with it. You could see movement in the branches, but you couldn't hear it. Not even leaves rustling. That's what really set me on edge. I stood there in the middle of the clearing, watching the pines bend, but it felt like I was watching a video on mute. Just the movement, no noise at all. Even the dry grass near my feet didn't crunch when I stepped on it. I turned in a slow circle, trying to get my bearings. The trail that led in was still there, but it looked different somehow. Narrower, like the trees had crept closer. The brush around the edges had a kind of flattened look, like something large had moved through earlier. I hadn't noticed that the day before. I walked about 10 feet down the trail and stopped when I felt something like pressure in the air. It wasn't wind. It wasn't sound. Just this low, heavy feeling, like the space around me had thickened somehow. My ears started to ring faintly, like the pressure you get when you're descending fast in a plane. I looked up again and the stars were even brighter now, but the sky had taken on a kind of green tint near the horizon. Like aurora glow, but there was no movement to it. That's when I heard the clicking. It started off soft, irregular, like a small pebble tapping wood. I spun around thinking it was an animal, but there was nothing there. The clicking kept going, not fast, not constant, just one or two clicks, a pause, then another. I couldn't place the source. It sounded like it was coming from every direction at once, or maybe from underground. I backed toward the tent, half expecting something to dart out from the trees. But nothing ever did. The clicking faded slowly, like it was moving away, or maybe just sinking deeper, I don't know. The pressure in the air lifted about 10 minutes after that. The shadows went back to normal. The wind made sound again. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. Startup vibration. I yanked it out and watched it reboot like it had just been turned off normally. Battery was at 87%. My headlamp came back on too. No flickering, just bright white light like nothing had happened. The watch still read 12, and I had no signal until around mid-morning the next day. But everything else was fine. Batteries all good, gear fully functional. I packed up as soon as the sun rose. Didn't even make breakfast, just got my stuff together and hiked back out. I didn't sleep again that night, just sat near the fire pit watching the stars shift back into place one by one. I was out on the north side of the Eagle River Trail, just past where the main path splits and the ridge starts to slope up toward the overlook. It was early September and the weather was decent, cool but not cold, mostly clear sky. I'd gone out solo that afternoon, just trying to stretch my legs after a rough work week. I wasn't planning to do anything too strenuous, just an out and back before it got dark. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I stopped near a switchback to drink some water and take in the view. The valley below looked almost fake. All those deep greens and blues and not a sound except wind and maybe the distant rush of the creek. I wasn't thinking about anything important, mostly just enjoying the quiet. That's when I noticed something move behind the far ridge across from me. It wasn't dramatic, just a small, sudden glint of light like metal catching the sun. At first I figured it was a plane, but it wasn't moving sideways, it was rising, slowly at a straight upward angle. I watched it come up from behind the ridge. It was silver, smooth, kind of like a pill shape, but flatter on top. No wings or fins or rotors. It didn't spin or wobble, just rose straight up, like it was being lifted on a wire, completely silent. I stood there frozen with my water bottle halfway to my mouth, just watching it. Once it cleared the ridge, maybe 300 or 400 feet above it, it stopped, just hovered in place. I remember checking my watch out of habit. It was 4:42 p.m. Then, maybe 5 seconds later, it shot straight up into the sky. No buildup, no noise, just gone, like something yanked it upward. I followed it with my eyes as long as I could, but it disappeared into the blue so fast it was like watching a stone fall into deep water. There was nothing after that. No echo, no wind, no birds spooked out of the trees. Everything just went back to normal. I stood there for another minute or two, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but there wasn't much to work with. It wasn't shaped like a drone, wasn't a balloon. I've seen plenty of those in Anchorage, and nothing man-made I know of moves like that. I didn't head back right away. I felt weird, but not scared, mostly curious. I kept hiking a little further up toward the ridge. I wasn't planning to go all the way to the top, just closer to where I'd seen it rise from. Not that I thought I'd find anything. It was just one of those things you do on autopilot when you're trying to convince yourself it wasn't as strange as it looked. About 30 minutes later, I stopped again. Same general direction as before, just higher up. I sat on a rock and took out a protein bar. That's when I noticed my watch said 7:03. That didn't make any sense. I thought maybe I'd misread it earlier, so I pulled out my phone to double check the time. It also said 7:03, and the sun was a little lower than it should have been. Shadows had stretched way out. I stood there trying to remember how long I'd actually been walking. It hadn't felt like more than maybe an hour since I saw the thing rise. Maybe less. But 2 full hours had passed. I didn't sit or nap or zone out. I was walking steadily most of the time. But now I was behind schedule and I'd have to jog part of the way back to beat the dark. I didn't panic, but something about it started to bother me more than it had before. Like I was only just realizing how quiet it was again. No birds, no insects, not even the wind this time. It was that kind of quiet where your ears start to ring a little. Then I heard a crack, like a stick breaking. It came from behind me, maybe 20 feet up the trail. I turned around, expecting to see another hiker or maybe a deer, but the trail was empty. Nothing moved. Trees were still. I waited another 10 seconds. Then I picked up my pace and started heading back down. I didn't run, but I wasn't taking my time either. I kept checking behind me every couple minutes. I don't usually get nervous out there. I've hiked that trail dozens of times, but I felt like something was off. I didn't see anyone, though. About halfway back, I paused again at the same overlook where I'd first seen the thing. The sun had dropped more, and the air felt cooler. I looked back toward the ridge, and there it was. Same silver shape, but this time it was descending. Slowly. Not falling, but coming down with the same smooth motion it had used going up. Straight down, no sound, no wobble. It was around the same height as before, a few hundred feet above the ridge, and coming back down into the exact same spot it had risen from. I didn't take my eyes off it. I didn't even blink. It was real. I'm as sure of that as I've ever been about anything. It sank behind the trees, out of view. I watched for a long time after that, but it didn't come back up. Nothing else moved. I kept waiting to hear something. Branches cracking, an engine, even the sound of a door shutting. But there was nothing. Just more of that weird, stretched out silence. Eventually, I kept walking. My legs felt heavy. I wasn't even thinking about what it could have been anymore. Just trying to get back before dark. My head was kind of buzzing, like I'd gone too long without eating. When I got to the trailhead, there were only 2 other cars left in the lot. One of them was mine. The other had Washington plates, no one inside. I didn't see anyone else around. The air smelled a little metallic. Not strong, but noticeable. I thought it might be the creek or something in the soil. I got in my car and sat there for a while before starting it. I didn't check my phone again. I didn't take any pictures. I didn't want to explain what I'd seen. I didn't even know how I'd start. The drive home was quiet, no traffic. I remember watching the treetops in the rearview mirror more than the road. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about how precisely it moved. How it had come back to the same place 2 hours later like nothing had happened in between. I've gone hiking in that area again since then, but never alone. And I haven't seen anything like that again. Nothing close. But I still think about that stretch of time I lost. I don't have any explanation for it. The watch, the phone, they matched. It wasn't a dead battery or a glitch. It was just 2 hours gone. It started out like a normal run. I'd had a long day and needed to clear my head, so I laced up around 8:45 and headed out. The sun had just dipped behind the trees and the air had that nice cool snap it gets in early fall. I usually do a loop through the neighborhoods north of my place. Quiet streets, not much traffic, decent sidewalks. I've been running the same route for over a year. I don't run with music, just my watch. It tracks distance, pace, time, all that. I checked it as I hit the end of my driveway, 8:52 p.m. I remember that because I told myself I'd be back by 9:30 latest, maybe 9:40 if I pushed the pace. I had work the next morning. The first 15 minutes were totally normal. I did the stretch down Hawthorne, took a left at the gas station, jogged past the laundromat, and crossed into the residential area behind it. From there, it's pretty much a straight shot north for a bit. Then I usually swing back east and loop down past the park. The intersection I kept hitting, the one that got weird, was this little 4-way stop where Willow bends into Hollow Creek Road. It's not remarkable or anything. Just a stop sign, a street lamp, and a mail cluster for a cul-de-sac. First time I passed it was around 9:10. I remember because I saw a kid on a scooter roll through it and almost wipe out on the curb. His mom was trailing behind, yelling at him to wait. Anyway, I kept running. Took the same left I always do, past a row of duplexes, then right by the dog park, which was empty. Everything quiet, normal. About 5 minutes later, I hit that same intersection again. At first, I figured I'd messed up, took the wrong turn somewhere, maybe doubled back by accident. But that didn't make sense. I know that route like the back of my hand, and it's not a loop. It's a straight line with a big curve at the top. There's no way to circle back to Willow and Hollow Creek unless you intentionally turn around. I stood there under the street lamp, catching my breath and trying to piece it together. Same exact spot, same mailbox, same dented stop sign, even the same flickering light overhead. It had a faint buzz I hadn't noticed the first time. I looked down at my watch. It said 9:17, so I thought, okay, maybe I zoned out. Maybe I got turned around and just didn't notice. It happens. I turned again, this time more carefully, paying attention to every turn. I passed the duplexes, again. Dog park, again. Took a sharp right onto Linden, which should have spit me out by the shopping center. But instead I came up to the same intersection. Willow and Hollow Creek. Third time. I stopped running. This time I just stood there in the middle of the road, looking around. There wasn't a single car, not even parked ones nearby. No porch lights on. The houses looked still. Not empty exactly, but nothing felt alive. I didn't even hear crickets. That buzzing from the street lamp seemed louder. I checked my watch again, 9:24. I started walking, not running. Something about running made it feel worse, like I was stuck on a treadmill or looping some broken game map. I walked to the next block, turned a hard left, then another left, then kept going straight, away from where I'd come. I walked for what felt like 10 minutes, probably more. I passed a row of brick homes with trimmed hedges, a church I didn't recognize, and an empty lot with a chain link fence. None of that should have been on my route. I remember thinking maybe I'd wandered into the next neighborhood over, except the street names still matched. Same ones I'd seen 20 minutes ago. Eventually I saw it again. Willow and Hollow Creek. The same intersection. Fourth time. But something was different. There was a dog this time. A black lab sitting right under the mailbox. Not moving, just staring at me. It didn't bark or growl, it didn't even get up. Just sat there, perfectly still. I kept my distance and stepped under the street lamp. The light wasn't flickering anymore, it was steady and brighter than before. Bright enough that it felt like a spotlight. I looked down at my watch again, 11:38. I blinked a few times, thinking it was a glitch. Hit the side button, nothing changed. The seconds were still ticking. 2 full hours later than when I started. That's when I realized my legs were sore. Not just sore, tired. Like I'd been running for 2 hours straight. My shirt was soaked through, my throat was dry. But I hadn't felt any of that happening. I turned in a full circle, trying to figure out where I was, but everything looked off. Like the houses were too still, the windows too dark. I didn't hear anything. No bugs, no cars, no wind. Not even my own footsteps, it felt like. The dog was gone. I didn't see it leave. I just looked over again and it wasn't there anymore. Nothing in the street. Mailbox untouched. That same hum from the streetlight, now softer, almost behind me somehow, even though the light was above. I picked a direction and started walking fast. I didn't run. I was too winded and something in me said not to. I just walked, turning down the first road I didn't recognize, then another, then another. No cars passed me. No porch lights came on. Then, all of a sudden, I was standing in front of the gas station, the one by my house. I don't remember how I got there. Last I knew, I'd turned off Willow onto a street called Blue Jay Lane. That shouldn't connect to the main road. But there it was. The gas station, lit up and buzzing with the usual fluorescent glow. One car at the pump, an old guy inside paying. I crossed the lot and stood there under the awning for a while. The guy came out and gave me a weird look. Probably because I was dripping sweat and just standing there without buying anything. I walked home from there. It took about 5 minutes. When I got inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and checked my phone, 11:48. It matched the watch. I showered, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stared at the wall for a long time. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I synced my watch to my running app. It showed a total run time of 2 hours and 49 minutes, with multiple split segments logged, but they didn't make any sense. The GPS path just circled a 4-block area over and over. It's never done that before. Nothing like this has happened again. I still run, but I stick to daytime now. Haven't gone down Willow since. The storm came in fast. I'd just gotten home from work around 6, and the sky had already gone that weird greenish color it gets before a bad one rolls in. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on the house. I live out near the edge of town, where the streetlights thin out and the power lines dip low between the poles. When storms hit out here, they hit hard. I grilled a quick dinner while the wind picked up. By the time I sat down to eat, rain had started tapping at the windows and the sky was flashing every few seconds. Not much thunder at first, just lightning lighting up the clouds. That kind where the whole sky goes white for a second, like someone taking a photo with the flash on. Around 7, the power flickered once, then went out completely. I sat there in the dark with my plate for a minute, listening to the wind shove itself against the side of the house. My phone still had some charge, so I used it as a flashlight and cleaned up the kitchen. I wasn't too worried. Outages happen pretty regularly out here when trees go down. It was when I stepped out onto the porch to smoke that I noticed it. The rain had backed off a little, and there was this thick layer of clouds overhead, lit up now and then by the storm. I was just standing there, watching it. I've always liked storms. The way everything else goes quiet, except for the wind and the distant thunder. One of the flashes lit up the sky, and I saw something up in the clouds, but it didn't disappear with the lightning. It stayed there, a kind of shape. Not flat like a plane, rounder, almost like a pill standing upright, or a capsule. It was hard to tell how high up it was because the clouds were moving fast and thick, but it wasn't small. What struck me first was the color. It wasn't reflecting the lightning. It was glowing on its own. A dull silver, not like metal under a spotlight, but like it had light inside it. The glow sort of pulsed like it was breathing, slow and steady. I watched it for a solid 30 seconds before another flash lit up the sky again, and the thing was still there, exactly where it had been. No movement, no sound, just hanging there. I thought maybe it was a trick of the storm, a drone maybe, or a balloon. But it wasn't swaying, and it wasn't shaped like anything I'd seen fly. There weren't any blinking lights on it, and it was too smooth, too clean. I went back inside, got my binoculars from the closet, and came back out. When I focused on it, I could see that the pulsing wasn't regular. Sometimes it'd dim for a while, then get brighter again, almost white-hot before fading back to silver. It didn't look like any light I'd seen come from a machine. Then, as I was watching, it started to rotate. Very slowly. Not spinning fast, just a slow, steady turn, like it was adjusting itself. But there wasn't any sound, no rumble, no wind shifting. It just pivoted a little and stopped. Then all the hair on my arms stood up. It wasn't thunder. There wasn't a boom or a crack. It was just this low pressure in the air, like something had moved through it, but without actually touching anything. I took a step back from the porch rail and realized the crickets had stopped. No insects, no frogs. Even the wind had gone still. Just the sound of the rain dripping off the roof and that quiet pulsing glow in the clouds. I backed into the house and shut the door. Not slammed, just closed it slowly. I left the porch light off. From the living room window, I could still see it, just barely, through the trees. Same position, same shape, same soft glow, barely changing now. It stayed like that for maybe 5 more minutes. I just stood there watching. Then, without any warning, it started to fade. Not blink out. Fade. Like it was being swallowed by the clouds, but nothing around it was moving. The glow got dimmer and dimmer until it was gone. Not behind anything. Just gone. And about 10 seconds later, the thunder started again, like someone had hit play on the weather. Wind picked up, rain started coming down in sheets, and that normal, chaotic feel of a storm came back all at once. A branch hit the roof, my porch light flickered and came back on. The crickets started chirping again like they just remembered what they were doing. Power came back around 11. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept looking out the window, checking the clouds. I didn't see anything else. The next morning, I drove out to the store and stopped to grab gas. I asked the guy working if the storm had knocked out power for everyone. Whole strip went dark, he said. Couple transformers blew. Lightning hit him directly. I asked if anyone else had seen anything weird in the sky. He just looked at me and said, "Weird how?" I didn't know what to say to that. I just shrugged and said, "Never mind." The transformers were 2 streets over from my house. I drove past them. One of the poles was scorched, blackened like it had been burned from the inside. No trees nearby, no wires down. That's all. Nothing ever showed up in the paper, no weather anomalies reported. No one else mentioned anything. I haven't seen anything like it again, but that shape, that glowing, I think about it more than I'd like to admit. I was driving back from my sister's place in Vermont. She'd just had her second kid, and I'd gone up to help for a few days. I left around 7 that night, figuring I'd beat the worst of the weekend traffic. It was late October, so it got dark fast, and by the time I was cutting through the back roads near the New Hampshire border, I was the only one out there. There's a long stretch of highway before you hit I-89 where it's just woods on both sides. No gas stations, no shoulder, barely even any signs. It's not technically a back road, but it feels like one. 2 lanes, cracked pavement, those faded white lines that almost disappear at night. I had the windows up, music low, just trying to stay alert. I remember checking the dash clock. It was 9:17. A few minutes later, I thought I heard something. Not over the music, but sort of under it, like it was coming from outside the car. I paused the song and rolled down the window a bit. At first, it just sounded like wind in the trees. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, a crying sound. High-pitched, like a kid, or maybe a woman. It was coming from the woods off the right side of the road. I slowed down without really thinking. There weren't any other cars in sight. No houses, no driveways. I coasted along until I saw a little gravel patch, maybe where a plow turns around or someone parks to hunt, and pulled off. I left the engine running and cracked the door, trying to figure out what I was hearing. The crying was steady. Not loud, but clear. It didn't rise and fall like someone actually sobbing. It was more like a loop, repeating in the same rhythm every few seconds. I stood there with one foot on the pavement and the other in the gravel, listening. It felt weird, hearing something like that in the middle of nowhere. I thought maybe someone had gotten lost hiking. It was cold, and if it really was a kid out there, they wouldn't last long. I grabbed the flashlight I keep in the glove box and walked a few feet toward the tree line. Not into the woods, just close enough to get a better listen. The crying stopped, just cut off mid-sound. I waited, thinking maybe whoever it was had heard me and was about to call out or something. Instead, it was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs. Even the leaves had gone still. Then I heard my name. Just one word, Lena. Same pitch as the crying, same tone, like whoever had been making that sound had just switched to saying my name instead. I froze. It wasn't like someone shouting from deep in the woods. It was clearer than that, closer, but not from the trees. It came from above me. I tilted my head up and scanned the branches with the flashlight. The beam shook a little. I was trying to stay calm, but it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't see anything. No animal, no person, just leaves shifting slightly in the breeze that had suddenly come up. Then it came again. Lena. Same exact tone. Perfectly even. Not natural. I took a step back toward the car. The gravel crunched loud under my boot. I turned and looked at the road just to reassure myself that it was still there, still empty, but something in me knew I needed to leave. Not investigate, not help. Just go. I got back in the car and slammed the door. I didn't even check the mirror before pulling out. I didn't care if someone was coming. I just needed to get out of that spot. As I drove, I kept the window cracked. I couldn't help it. I needed to know if it followed. For about a mile, I didn't hear anything. Then, just as I rounded a long bend, I heard it again. Lena. But this time it was fainter, like it was farther back. Still above, though. Not from the woods, not from the road, from up. It didn't echo or carry like a bird call. It was just there. And then it wasn't. I didn't stop again. I kept driving until I reached a gas station near the interstate. I parked by the pumps and just sat there for a while with the engine running. I didn't fill up, didn't go inside. I just needed to be somewhere lit, somewhere human. Eventually, I made it home. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. Not because I thought they'd laugh, just because I didn't know how to explain what I'd heard. How do you tell someone the thing that scared you wasn't what you saw, but where the sound was coming from? I checked the area on a map later. There's no trail near that spot, no campgrounds, just forest. A week later, I drove up that way again for work, but I took the long way around. I haven't been back on that road since. I was in the living room watching some show on mute. Can't remember what it was. Something dumb I just had on for noise. My wife had gone to bed a little earlier, and I was doing the thing where you tell yourself just one more episode, even though you're barely paying attention. Our daughter was smug-smulled then. We'd gotten one of those baby monitors with the video screen, not the super fancy kind, but decent. The camera was clipped to the curtain rod in her room, angled down at the crib. I had the monitor next to me on the couch. She'd gone down around 9:30, no issues. She was a good sleeper back then. Still is, mostly. I glanced at the monitor every few minutes out of habit. It was one of those grayscale night vision feeds. Grainy, a little laggy. You couldn't really make out details, just shapes and movement. But you could see enough. Around 11:10, I looked down at the screen and noticed something weird. There was a shape in the upper right corner, kind of faint. At first I thought it was just glare or maybe a reflection off the glass. The camera sometimes caught headlights from the street. We live in a cul-de-sac, so it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. But the shape wasn't moving like light would. It was kind of hovering there, right near the window. It looked like a smudge or a pale outline. Too big to be a bug, and it didn't flicker like a car going past. It just stayed there. I leaned in closer. The screen was small, so I tilted it toward me and squinted. The shape looked a little clearer now. Not sharp, but defined, like it had edges. It reminded me of a person's shoulder, or maybe the side of a head, just barely visible against the glass. Still and faint, like it was behind a layer of fog. I sat there for a while watching it, trying to convince myself it was just part of the curtain. Maybe the fabric had bunched up and the night vision was catching it weird. I got up and went to the bottom of the stairs, listening. The house was quiet. I didn't want to wake the baby if everything was fine, so I went back to the couch and stared at the screen again. The shape hadn't moved. Then, maybe 20 seconds later, it did. Not a lot. It just sort of shifted, like it leaned forward a little. And the weird part was, it didn't affect the curtain at all. The fabric stayed completely still. I could see the shape move, but the rest of the room didn't react. I turned the monitor's volume up a notch. Nothing. No rustling, no breathing, no sounds at all. My heart was going a little faster now, but I kept telling myself it was just a glitch. Maybe the feed lagged and it was a delayed shadow from earlier. I waited, watching the screen. That's when the shape turned. It wasn't a full turn, more like it pivoted slightly, enough that I could tell it wasn't part of the window anymore. It pulled away from the glass. There was space between it and the curtain now, and I saw just enough to realize the shape had some kind of face. Not a clear one, not detailed, but there was something where a face would be. Lighter in the middle, darker around the sides, like eyes or shadows where eyes should be. It faced the crib, not moving, just watching. I don't really remember standing up. I just remember suddenly being in the hallway, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't think. I didn't grab anything. I just needed to get to her room. The door was closed, same as we'd left it. I opened it fast and stepped inside. The room was cold, not freezing, but cooler than it should have been. The window was shut, curtains still drawn, the crib was empty. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I looked all around the room, corner to corner, under the crib, behind the rocking chair. Then I saw her. She was lying on the carpet just to the left of the dresser, on her back, arms out, looking straight up. Not crying, not even fussing, just staring at the ceiling like she'd been gently placed there. I picked her up and backed out of the room. She felt normal, warm, breathing steady. She even smiled a little as I held her. I took her into our bedroom and flipped the light on. My wife woke up, half asleep, confused. I told her I'd found the baby on the floor and that we might have a loose crib rail or something. I didn't say anything else. The monitor was still downstairs. I didn't go back for it until the morning. When I finally checked the feed, the camera had frozen around 11:13. The battery hadn't died. It was still powered on, just frozen on a single frame. That same faint shape by the window, half turned toward the crib. The curtain was in that frame too. Still, unmoving. I checked the crib. Nothing broken, nothing loose, no signs she'd climbed out or fallen. She was too small to do that anyway. I moved the camera to a shelf across the room. I didn't say much to my wife, just told her I wanted a better angle. That night, and for several nights after, the monitor didn't show anything weird. No shapes, no movement, just the regular grainy black and white image. But I started sleeping with the door open, and I kept the monitor on full volume. She's older now. Her room's been rearranged, different curtains, different monitor, different crib. I haven't seen that shape again. But sometimes when I check on her and the lights are low, I still glance at the window before anything else. I was flying my drone over the old Miller farm just outside town that Saturday afternoon. The place had been empty for years. Weeds grown over the rusted fence posts, and the barn half collapsed. I liked it because there weren't many trees, just open fields that gave good wide shots. I was testing out some new camera settings for a freelance project, nothing fancy. I usually fly in quieter spots like that so I don't bother anyone. The day was clear, blue sky with a few puffy clouds drifting by. Perfect weather for flying. I set up on the dirt road at the edge of the property and launched the drone from my backpack. I got it up to about 200 feet, just cruising over the fields, doing slow sweeps with the camera. The controls felt normal, smooth. I remember thinking how nice it was to get away from everything for a while. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the drone started to feel a little sluggish on the controls. When I tried to turn it left, it lagged like the response was delayed. At first, I thought maybe it was interference from power lines or something. I glanced around, but there was nothing except open fields and that one old farmhouse down the road. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, the sun dimmed for a second. It wasn't like a cloud passing by. It was more sudden, like something dark moved across the sky and blocked the light for just a moment. I stopped the drone and pointed the camera up, trying to see if it was just a bird or maybe a plane. The screen showed something weird. A dark shape, smooth and rounded, almost featureless, gliding silently in front of the sun. It wasn't big, smaller than a plane, but bigger than a bird, maybe the size of a large drone. It looked like it was floating, no wings or anything sticking out. It passed in front of the sun and then vanished, just disappeared. No shadow followed it on the ground, no sound. At that exact moment, the drone lost all response. I tried the controller a few times, pushing the sticks and hitting the emergency stop, but nothing worked. The drone kept drifting slowly forward, like it was on autopilot. The video feed started to glitch, flickering black and white lines, then the screen froze for a couple seconds. When it came back, the camera was pointed straight down at the grass. I was freaking out a little now. I hit the return to home button, but the drone ignored it. It just kept drifting away from me, moving towards the far side of the field near the old barn. I kept trying to regain control, but the drone stayed unresponsive. The signal on my controller dropped from full bars down to 1, and then nothing. I could still see the screen a few times flicker back on with static and blurry images. At one point, the drone camera caught a brief glimpse of something dark moving in the distance near the tree line, but it was gone before I could zoom in. I was watching the screen the whole time, heart racing, trying to stay calm. It felt like those few minutes stretched out forever. Then the feed cut out completely. No video, no signal. The controller beeped like it had lost connection. I waited a while, hoping it would reconnect, but nothing. I didn't want to go chasing after it in the dark, so I packed up and left the farm. I kept looking back toward the field from the road as I drove away. No lights, no movement. The next day, I went back at first light with my buddy to look for the drone. The ground was dry, and I didn't see any sign of it. No pieces, no tracks, nothing. Later, when I downloaded the footage, that's when things got weirder. The video was mostly fine up until the moment the drone lost control. Right before the signal died, you can see the dark shape glide across the sun, just like I saw in real life. It's smooth, no edges, just a shadow passing over the camera. Then the image glitches and the camera suddenly points straight down. The weird part is the shape disappears without casting any shadow on the ground. I watched it over and over. The footage showed no evidence of birds or planes or anything like that. Just that dark shape moving silently, then gone. The rest of the video from the drone's camera after the blackout is corrupted. Nothing but static. I don't know what it was. I don't think it was any drone or aircraft, I know. I'm not into conspiracy stuff, but I haven't been able to explain it. I haven't flown the drone since. I'm not sure I want to go back out there alone. The whole thing still doesn't make sense. I pulled off the highway at that rest area just before midnight. I'd been driving all day, running on fumes, and figured I'd get some shut-eye before making the last leg of the run. The place wasn't much, just some concrete slabs with a few scattered trucks, a dimly lit bathroom building, and a couple of vending machines. Nothing fancy. I parked my rig in the far corner, away from the others, and settled in for a few hours. I remember turning off the engine, grabbing my phone to check the time, 3:17 a.m. I set my alarm for 4 hours later, laid back, and closed my eyes. It wasn't long before I passed out. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was that everything felt off. Not in a I slept weird way, but like the whole world was just slightly wrong. I blinked against the pale light coming through the window. The sky outside wasn't dark like it should have been at 3 in the morning. It was this strange, dull color, sort of a muted greenish gray. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was still dreaming or had some kind of weird sleep paralysis. But no, the sky stayed that same weird color, and the air felt heavy and still. I glanced around the cab, trying to shake off the grogginess. That's when I noticed all my clocks. My phone, the little digital one on the dashboard, even the clock on my CB radio were frozen. All of them stuck at exactly 3:17. That didn't make any sense. I'd just woken up. At least I thought I had. I checked my phone again. Dead screen. Tried to turn it on a couple times. Nothing. The battery was full when I went to sleep, so it shouldn't have died already. I started to feel uneasy, the kind of uneasy that crawls up your spine without making a sound. Then I heard it, a low, steady hum coming from underneath my trailer. It wasn't the usual sound of trucks idling or the highway traffic in the distance. This was different, smooth, continuous, and almost mechanical, but not in any way I could place. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, like something was vibrating beneath me. I climbed out of the cab, squinting into the dim light outside. I checked under the trailer, but there was nothing there. No equipment, no animals, nothing that could explain the humming. I walked back to the cab and tried to start the engine. The key turned, the dashboard lights flickered, but the engine didn't catch. I tried again and again, but nothing. Then I looked up at the sky. The color wasn't changing, not getting darker like it should. It was stuck, like a broken picture hanging in place. I decided to head to the bathroom building, hoping maybe someone else was awake, or at least to get a better look at the sky away from my truck. As I walked, the humming grew quieter, almost fading into the background. When I reached the building, I noticed it was empty. No sounds from inside, no flicker of light in the windows. Even the vending machines were dead. No lights, no noises. I tried the door, it was unlocked but heavy. Inside, the air was stale and cold, and the fluorescent lights above were off. I found the restroom, looked in the mirror, and that's when the unease really settled in. My reflection looked the same, but the room felt hollow. Like the light wasn't really there, just pretending. I looked outside through the window. The sky stayed that same dull green-gray. And then I thought I saw something, a shadow, just out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, but there was nothing. No one else was there. I went back outside, and that's when I noticed my truck's dash clock again, still frozen at 3:17. I reached into my pocket for my phone once more. Dead. No signal, no sound. I sat on the concrete slab outside the bathroom building, trying to make sense of any of it. Then, without warning, the humming started up again, louder this time. Not beneath my trailer, but somewhere close. Maybe inside the field next to the rest area. I stood up and shone my flashlight toward the tall grass. The beam caught something moving, something smooth and dark, but it slipped behind a tree before I could see what it was. I called out, but my voice sounded distant, like it was being swallowed by the still night. The humming stopped again. I stayed where I was, not sure whether to head back to the truck or try to find someone. Anyone. I finally got up and walked back toward the cab. As I got closer, the humming started again, this time steady and low, but I could feel it vibrating through the ground. I sat in the cab, trying to start the engine again. It was no use. Then I noticed something else. The little green light on the dashboard that usually blinks when the ABS is active, normally off while parked, was blinking steadily in sync with the humming. I reached down and turned off the ignition completely. The light went out, the humming stopped, and the sky finally started to darken, fading back to normal night colors. I blinked a few times and everything was normal again. The clock on my phone turned back on, showing 3:19. The dash clock started moving again. I didn't stay long after that. I started the engine, and it fired up right away. I pulled out of the rest area without looking back. I told a couple of other truckers about it later, but no one had ever heard of anything like it happening there before. I don't know what that humming was, or why the clock stopped at 3:17. I don't know why the sky was that weird color, or what moved behind those trees. All I know is that night was different, and part of me still wonders if I really woke up at all. We were hiking a marked trail up in the hills outside town, just a group of 4 friends looking for a night adventure. It was late summer, and none of us had done a night hike before, so the plan was simple. Head out at dusk, hike up to a clearing where you can see the city lights, hang out for a bit, then come back down before it got too late. We started around 8 p.m., the sky still showing the last pinks of sunset. It was all normal at first. The usual crackle of leaves underfoot, the sound of distant crickets, the occasional owl hoot. We each had flashlights and headlamps, enough batteries to last the night. We kept the pace easy, mostly chatting and joking, trying to ignore the creeping dark. About an hour in, we hit the part of the trail that runs through thick woods, the kind where the trees crowd close and the canopy swallows most of the light. The path narrowed and the sounds around us got louder. Frogs, rustling leaves, the wind stirring branches. Then, just as we got to a bend where the trail straightened, the clicking started. At first, I thought it was just twigs snapping under the feet of an animal, but the clicks were too regular, too rhythmic, like a metronome set at a steady pace. It came from all around us, some close, some farther off, echoing through the trees in every direction. We all froze and stopped walking. The clicks kept going, steady, like someone tapping a wooden stick or some kind of slow mechanical clack. None of us said anything for a moment. I switched off my flashlight to see if the clicks were related to the lights somehow. The moment my beam went dark, the clicking stopped. We all looked at each other, and then one of us flicked their light back on. The clicks started again immediately. We tried switching off and on a few times, shining our flashlights around, pointing them at the trees, at the bushes, the empty trail ahead. Each time a light shone somewhere, the clicking stopped instantly. We moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping left and right, trying to find the source. Nothing moved in the beams except shadows of leaves and branches. No animals ran off, no branches snapped. Just silence where the light hit and the clicking resuming wherever the beams didn't reach. One of my friends, Mark, whispered that maybe it was some kind of bug or insect. Maybe cicadas or beetles making a clicking noise. But I knew cicadas don't make that kind of rhythm, and I've never heard bugs stop their noise the instant light touches them. Besides, the clicks were loud enough that it seemed like something bigger or closer. We kept walking slowly, flashlights covering every angle, and each time a light crossed the area where the clicks came from, the noise stopped. It was like the sound was avoiding the light or hiding from it. After about 10 minutes of this, we started to get nervous. The woods felt different, heavier, quieter, aside from those clicks. It wasn't just the noise itself, it was the way it seemed aware of us, reacting to the light as if whatever was making it didn't want to be seen. Then, without warning, the clicking stopped completely. No rhythm, no echoes, nothing. The woods went silent again, just the wind in the trees and our breathing. We stood still for a minute, waiting for the clicks to come back, but they didn't. We kept shining our lights around, calling out softly to each other. No response, no more clicking. The rest of the hike up was quiet, too quiet. We all felt on edge but said little. When we finally reached the clearing with the city lights, the night felt normal again. The bugs were chirping, the breeze was gentle, no strange sounds. On the way down, the woods didn't make any of the weird clicking noises. just the usual night sounds. We talked about it, trying to make sense of what we heard. Maybe an animal we'd never seen before. Maybe something else. None of us could come up with a good answer. Since then, I've thought about it a lot. I checked with local wildlife groups, but no one could identify any creature that makes rhythmic clicking sounds like that and stops immediately when light hits it. I keep going back to that moment when the clicks just stopped for good. It felt deliberate, like whatever it was chose not to make noise anymore once we tried to find it. I don't know what we heard that night. I don't know if it was alive or something else. But it stuck with me, the way the woods suddenly went quiet and how the clicking avoided the light like it knew it didn't want to be found. I was about 10 or 11 maybe, and it was a summer night when it happened. Nothing special at first, just me and my little brother out in the backyard, messing around with this cheap laser pointer Dad got me for Christmas. We weren't doing anything important, just shining it up at the sky, trying to hit the stars or clouds, seeing how far the little red dot could go before it disappeared. We'd been out there maybe half an hour, the kind of quiet evening where the crickets do their thing, and the occasional car goes by far off on the street. My brother was chasing fireflies, trying to catch them in his hands. I was more interested in the laser, pointing it randomly into the sky. At some point, I flicked the beam toward this thick patch of clouds hovering over the neighborhood. It was low and kind of blotchy, like it was hanging just a bit too close. When I pointed the laser at the clouds, I noticed this tiny flash way up there, like a light blinking. It wasn't far off, maybe just beyond the tree line behind our house. The light blinked twice, slow and deliberate, like someone was responding. I froze for a second, just watching it. The laser was still on, pointing right where the blinking happened. Then the light moved, slowly, smoothly, almost like it was gliding just above the trees, heading right over our house. I called my brother over, but he was too busy trying to catch bugs to care. I kept my eyes on the light as it drifted silently across the sky. No noise, nothing. It was just there, a little blinking shape moving against the dark clouds, which were lit faintly by the streetlights. It got directly over us, and I swear, for a moment, it was close enough I could have reached out and touched it if I was tall enough. The light didn't change color or flicker wildly. It just blinked twice more, slow and calm, like it was acknowledging me again. Then it started to disappear, sinking behind the clouds. I tried to keep the laser on it, but the beam hit the clouds and scattered. The blinking stopped completely, and after a minute or two, the clouds slowly shifted, and the light was gone. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but the street was quiet. No cars, no people, just the occasional hoot-hoot from an owl somewhere. I was kind of shaking a little, but didn't want to admit it. I called my brother over again and told him about it, but he just shrugged and went back to chasing bugs. Later, inside the house, I kept thinking about that light. I even tried to explain it to my parents, but they just smiled and said, I probably imagined it, or it was a plane. The weirdest thing was the next morning. I found little circles on the grass in the backyard about the size of a basketball, where the grass was flattened like something had been sitting there. My brother said he didn't notice anything when he was out there, and neither did Mom or Dad. I never told anyone about those circles. I'm not sure if they were from that night or something else, but combined with the blinking light and the way it moved, it just didn't feel normal. I tried looking up at the sky the next few nights, shining the laser pointer again, but nothing happened. No blinking, no lights, no signals. That night stayed with me, not because it was terrifying or anything, but because it didn't make sense. It was like something was out there watching or maybe even trying to talk, but not in words or sounds. Just these simple blinks, like a quiet acknowledgement. I still wonder what it was, drifting silently over our house, blinking twice, and then vanishing behind the clouds. I set up the camera deep in the woods on a Friday afternoon. I've been doing this for years, putting trail cams out in remote spots, hoping to catch some deer or maybe a fox. This time I picked a spot farther back than usual, near a creek bend where the trees get thick and the trails aren't used much. Figured it'd be a good chance to see something interesting. I mounted the camera on an old pine tree about 5 feet off the ground, angled down a little to cover the trail and some brush near the water. I checked the batteries, memory card, and made sure it was secure. That was around 3:30 p.m. The sun was starting to dip, but still plenty of light. I drove back home, about a 20-minute ride through dirt roads, feeling like I'd be checking the camera in a few days. But something about that spot made me a little uneasy. Nothing specific, just a general feeling like I'd left the camera somewhere I shouldn't have. I told myself it was just the usual nerves you get when you're alone in the woods, and went about my weekend. 2 days later, I went back with a fresh battery and a new card. I found the camera where I'd left it, still hanging from the pine. It looked untouched, no signs of animals or people messing with it. When I plugged the card into my laptop that night, most of the footage was just what I expected. Empty woods, a few squirrels, some deer walking by. Then I found something odd. About an hour before dusk on the first day, the camera recorded a 2-second clip that made me pause. At first, it just looked like a silhouette standing still near the edge of the frame. The shape was tall, unnaturally straight, and backlit by the sun slipping low through the trees. I could see the outline clearly, but no details, just a dark figure, almost like a shadow. The next frame after those 2 seconds was just static. No image, no movement, just snow on the screen like a broken TV signal. Then the camera stopped recording altogether. No more clips for the rest of the time it was out there. No motion triggers, no pictures, nothing. I thought maybe the battery died or the card got corrupted, but when I checked, the battery still had a charge and the card seemed fine. I went back the next day, swapped out the card again, and left the camera running, but it never recorded a single thing after that moment. I replayed that clip a dozen times. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there for the full 2 seconds, like it was watching something or waiting. The weird part was the way the light hit it. The edges of the shape looked fuzzy, like the figure was partially transparent or blurred. But it wasn't fog or glare. It was something else. I showed the clip to a couple of friends who like this kind of stuff, and they said it looked like a person at first glance, but the size and stillness were off. I agreed. The figure was too tall, and it didn't seem natural to just stand completely still like that in the woods. That night, I stayed up trying to figure out if the spot had any history, like strange sightings or old stories, but came up empty. The forest is old, sure, but nothing unusual popped up. After that, I went back to the site several times, both during the day and at night. No sign of anything strange. The forest was quiet, normal. Just the usual wildlife sounds, birds, squirrels, wind through the leaves. Still, I felt like I was being watched. Not like a sudden threat or a scary presence, but more like the woods themselves were aware I was there. I caught myself checking behind me more than once, expecting to see something out of place, but there was never anything. One evening, a few days after I retrieved the camera, I was walking back from the creek near that spot when I noticed something odd with the shadows. The sun was low, and the trees cast long shapes across the forest floor, but one shadow stood out. It was tall and straight, like the figure from the footage, but there was no tree or object nearby that could cast it. The shadow stretched away into the brush, just barely darker than the rest. I stopped and looked around, trying to find what was making it. Nothing. I blinked and the shadow was gone. I figured it was a trick of the light, but it stuck with me. That same night, I slept in my camper at the edge of the forest. I woke up around 3 a.m. because the woods outside were too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no wind, just dead silence. Then, faintly, I heard a soft humming noise. It wasn't steady, more like a low pulse or vibration. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds and then stopped. I told myself it was probably my imagination or some machine from a far-off campsite, but the silence after it felt heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The next morning, I checked my phone's clock. It was exactly 3:17. That time stuck in my head for some reason, though I don't know why. Over the next week, I kept an eye on that timestamp, but nothing else odd happened. The woods returned to normal, normal sounds, normal light, normal shadows, except the camera never recorded again after that static frame. I put it out one last time a couple weeks later in a different spot, closer to the edge of the forest, and it worked fine. Plenty of squirrels, raccoons, deer, no strange figures, no static frames, no missing footage. Still, I can't stop thinking about that 2-second clip and the tall shape standing there. What it was, why it didn't move, and why the camera stopped working right after. I know it's probably nothing or some glitch in the camera, but when I'm out there in the quiet woods, I keep expecting to see that shape again or feel it watching me. And every time I think about it, that shadowy figure is still standing there, backlit and motionless, waiting just beyond the trees. I've been into night photography for a few years now, mostly just messing around with long exposures, trying to catch the stars, the Milky Way when it's out, that kind of thing. There's something calming about it, being outside when everything's quiet, the world dark except for the sky. One weekend a couple months ago, I decided to drive out to a spot a little ways from town. It's the kind of place where there's almost no light pollution. I figured it'd be perfect for star photos. I got there around 11 p.m., set up my tripod, camera, and started snapping shots. At first, nothing unusual, just black sky sprinkled with stars, the usual stuff. But as I was reviewing the photos on my camera, I noticed something odd. There was one point of light that appeared in every single frame. No matter which way I aimed, it was always there, right near the edge of the photo. At first, I thought it was just a bright star or maybe a planet. I checked an app on my phone to see what was up that night. Venus wasn't visible, Mars was on the opposite side of the sky, and no satellites or planes were showing up on the tracker. This light didn't match any known objects. I figured maybe it was a glitch in the camera sensor, so I changed lenses, took more shots, but the light stayed in the same spot relative to the frame, no matter where I pointed. I moved the tripod to different spots around the area, walked a mile east, snapped more photos. Still, there it was, same spot in the frame, same brightness, same size. That's when I realized it wasn't just a bright star, it was fixed to the camera frame, but the sky moved around it, which made no sense, because if it was stuck to the camera, it shouldn't appear as a star out there. And if it was out in the sky, it shouldn't be stuck in the same spot in the frame, no matter where I moved. I packed up and drove about 20 miles further, somewhere even darker and more isolated. I took more photos again, just to be sure. Same result. That light was always there, hovering at the same point in every photo. That's when it started to feel off. I tried looking at it through binoculars, but couldn't pick it out clearly. It just looked like a tiny, steady point of light, not blinking or changing at all. I thought about it for a while, feeling more unsettled than I expected. I sat on the hood of my car, looking up, waiting to see if maybe it moved or blinked. Nothing. Then about an hour later, I noticed a faint humming sound. It wasn't loud, more like a distant drone, the kind you feel in your chest but barely hear. I looked around, no cars, no planes overhead, no wind either. The trees were still. I got up and started walking toward the tree line, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. The humming didn't get louder or quieter. It stayed steady, like it was surrounding me. That's when I realized I couldn't see the light anymore. It wasn't in the sky where I expected it to be. I turned around, trying to find it again, but nothing. No light, no star. I checked my camera, hoping to catch it again. I took a few photos, but the light didn't show up this time. The sky looked normal, stars scattered as usual. I started walking back to my car, feeling a little uneasy now. The hum had stopped. The air felt heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was no one there, just trees and darkness. When I got back in the car, I turned the heater on to warm up. The car radio was dead silent. No static, no stations at all, just a blank screen. Usually, even out there, I could pick up a faint signal or static. I tried turning the radio off and on a few times. Nothing changed. I drove back the way I came, feeling tense, eyes flicking between the road and the sky. As I passed the spot where I first saw the light, I looked up. The sky was clear, stars twinkling, but no strange light anywhere. A couple miles down the road, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number popped up. You saw it. I froze for a second, hands gripping the wheel tighter. The message had no name, no reply option. I deleted it, thinking it was a prank. But the feeling didn't leave me. The next morning, I checked my photos again. The images from that last night, the ones after the light disappeared, looked perfectly normal. No weird artifacts, no odd light spots, just stars. I've gone back to the spot a few times since then, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day, hoping to find something, anything that explains it. Nothing. The light never showed up again in any photo or in the sky. I haven't told many people about it because I don't have answers, and it sounds weird, but every time I look at my old photos, that strange light is there, locked in the same corner of every frame, like it's watching me, or maybe waiting for me to notice it again. I was out camping by myself on this clear summer night. I'd gone to this spot a few miles off the main road, where the trees thin out and you get a wide view of the sky. No lights around, just me and the quiet. I set up my tent and got a fire going before it got dark. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just wanted a night away from everything. After dinner, I sat on a log with a cold beer, just staring up at the stars. It was one of those nights where the sky feels vast and quiet. Nothing but the sound of the fire crackling and some distant bugs. I always liked looking at stars when I camped. There's something about how steady they look, like they've been there forever. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed one star that didn't look right. It was toward the south, low on the horizon, and it seemed brighter than the others. At first, I thought it might just be a planet, like Venus or something. But over the next few minutes, it didn't just stay bright. It actually got brighter, slowly, like it was glowing more. The other stars stayed the same, but this one star grew until it was as bright as the moon. I know it sounds dumb to say, but it didn't have the shape or texture of the moon, just the same brightness. I kept squinting, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I watched it for about 10 minutes as it got brighter. And then, after reaching that peak, it started dimming back down, just as slowly. What was weirder was that as it dimmed, it started moving. Not fast, just a tiny bit to the east. It wasn't a plane or a satellite, those usually blink or move faster. This thing was steady and smooth, like something drifting. The way it moved didn't make sense to me, because stars don't move like that in minutes. I kept my eyes locked on it, feeling more and more uncomfortable. It was like the calm of the night had this layer of tension added underneath. I kept turning around, checking behind me, the woods, but there was nothing. No sounds beyond the usual, no signs of anyone else nearby. The fire started to die down, so I got up to poke it, thinking maybe I was getting too fixated on that light. When I looked back, the star was almost back to normal brightness, but the spot it had been in was empty, like it had moved off behind a thin layer of clouds or just out of sight. I stood there for a while longer, but nothing else happened. The sky went back to normal, stars steady and quiet like they always are. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong or watching me, but the sense of being alone somehow made it worse. I didn't sleep much that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I could still see that bright star slowly getting bigger, then fading, drifting just out of reach. In the morning, everything looked normal. The woods were quiet, the campfire ashes cold. I packed up and left, but that night stayed with me in a way I can't explain. I don't know what I saw or why it moved the way it did. All I know is that it wasn't just a star. I was driving through the mountains late one night, heading home after visiting a friend a couple hours away. The road was mostly empty, just me and the occasional car going the other way. It was one of those narrow, two-lane roads that twist around the hills, the kind where you have to pay attention to every turn because the guardrails are thin or missing in places. I was about halfway through the stretch that runs along the ridge, windows down a crack to keep the air moving, when I saw a car up ahead. It was a small sedan, nothing flashy. The brake lights flicked on and off a couple times, like the driver was tapping them, maybe getting ready to slow down. Then it started to drift to the right edge of the lane, but really slowly, like it was easing onto the shoulder. I didn't think much of it until the car sort of lifted. Not in a quick, dramatic way, but gently, almost like it was floating. It rose maybe 2 or 3 feet off the pavement, just enough that the tires weren't touching the road anymore. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was tired or the headlights were messing with me. But no, the car stayed there, hovering silently for about 5 seconds. No engine noise changed, no wobbling or sudden movements. It was just steady in midair. Then, as quietly as it rose, it dropped back down onto the road. The tires touched the asphalt with a soft thud, and it rolled forward like nothing happened. The brake lights came on again for a second, then off, and the car continued driving at the same slow pace. I kept my eyes on it, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. The whole thing felt unreal, but the road, the trees, the night sky, all normal. I looked in my rearview mirror a couple times to see if any other cars were behind me, but the road was empty. I wanted to pull over, call someone, but my phone was in the center console charging, and I didn't want to take my eyes off that car, just in case it did something else weird. After a few minutes, the car turned off onto a side road, disappearing from view. I stayed on the main road and kept driving, feeling kind of numb and unsure if I should tell anyone. A few miles later, I stopped at a little roadside diner that was still open. The place was empty except for the waitress, a woman maybe in her 50s who looked like she'd worked there forever. I asked if she'd seen anything strange on the road tonight. She paused, then said, "People say they've seen some weird stuff out here, especially late at night. Lights that don't belong, sounds you can't explain, but I don't pay it much mind." I nodded, but didn't mention the car. It felt too strange to say out loud. When I got home, I checked my phone to see if there were any local news reports or social media chatter about odd sightings. Nothing. In the days after, I found myself watching the sky more often during my drives, but never saw anything like that again. Still, the memory of that car hovering kept creeping into my mind whenever I was alone on the road. I don't know what it was or why it happened. Just a quiet, strange moment that felt out of place in the middle of an ordinary night. I was out in the woods one late October afternoon, just after work, trying to squeeze in a little hunting before it got dark. The air was crisp but calm, not a cloud in the sky. I'd been walking the same ridge for years, knew those woods like the back of my hand. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened all day, just the usual quiet and the occasional rustle of squirrels or birds settling down for the evening. I was heading toward a clearing I sometimes checked near a small creek. The sun was already low, casting long shadows, and the forest was starting to feel that slow, heavy quiet that comes right before dark. I wasn't expecting to see anything much, honestly. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted the deer. It was maybe 20 yards ahead, standing completely still right at the edge of the clearing. The thing that caught my attention wasn't just that it wasn't moving, it was the way it was standing. Usually if a deer senses you, it bolts or at least shifts its stance, but this one was frozen in place like it had been rooted there for hours. No shaking or twitching. What really made me stop, though, was its eyes. They were wide open and fixed straight up at the sky. Not a typical alert look either. It was almost like it was in shock or awe. Its neck was tilted at an odd angle, and it didn't blink. I lowered my rifle slowly, figuring maybe it was hurt or sick. But as I moved closer, I saw no signs of injury. No limp, no blood, no breathing that I could tell from a distance. The fur was clean and smooth. Just that blank stare upward. I looked up, trying to see what had the deer's attention, but there was nothing unusual. Just clear blue sky, a few treetops framing it, and the afternoon sun shining like normal. No birds circling, no strange lights or shadows. I blinked and took a step forward. The deer didn't move. I thought maybe it was caught in some kind of trance or had a neurological thing going on, but it looked almost too deliberate. I kept my distance, but circled a bit to get a better angle. The deer stayed there, staring. A few minutes passed. The wind was still, no sound except for distant birds and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. I glanced around the clearing. The trees were tall and silent. The shadows were long but didn't seem out of place. Still, the air felt heavier, like when a storm's about to roll in, but the sky was clear. Then I noticed something else. The shadows from the trees around the clearing weren't pointing where they should. It was late afternoon, so shadows normally stretched toward the east, but these shadows all leaned slightly north, like the sun had shifted sideways for a second. I shook my head, thinking maybe I was just tired or the uneven ground was playing tricks on me. Still, the deer didn't shift. I started to feel uneasy, like I was being watched. I scanned the edges of the clearing, the dense woods beyond, but saw nothing. No animals, no movement, just stillness. The deer's eyes stayed locked on the sky. I took a few steps back, trying to clear my head. I wanted to leave, but something made me stay a moment longer, like I was waiting for it to blink or move or for the sky to show me what the deer was looking at. After maybe 10 minutes, the deer suddenly blinked. Just once, slow and deliberate. Then it turned its head sharply and bolted straight into the forest, disappearing without a sound. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the spot where it vanished. The shadows around me slowly shifted back to their normal angle. The air felt lighter again, and the forest started to fill with evening sounds, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, insects starting their night songs. I walked back to my truck without looking back. On the drive home, my mind kept replaying what I'd seen: the frozen deer, the strange shadow shift, the sudden feeling of being watched. When I got home, I checked the weather and light conditions from that afternoon. Everything was normal. Clear skies, sun setting where it should. No unusual reports from the area. I didn't tell anyone about it. It sounded crazy. But sometimes when I'm sitting on my porch at night, I think about that deer and how it just stopped staring at nothing, like it knew something I didn't. I've been back to that clearing a few times since. Nothing like that happened again. Just regular deer, regular shadows. But every now and then when I'm alone out there, I look up at the sky a little longer than usual, wondering if whatever caught that deer's attention is still up there. I was sitting out in my backyard one night, just like I did a lot of nights before, looking up at the sky. I'm not a professional or anything, just a guy with a cheap telescope I got off an online sale and a half-broken pair of binoculars. I've always liked watching satellites and the occasional plane flying high up, just for the simple routine of it. It's calming, you know? Something predictable out there. That night, it was clear, maybe a little colder than usual for early fall. I had my chair set up near the fence, the telescope pointed toward the southwest where a bunch of satellites usually passed. I was scrolling through my notes on my phone. I keep track of when certain satellites are supposed to pass overhead, when I spotted something moving steadily across the sky. At first, I thought it was just one of those old satellites I'm used to seeing. It was a small white dot, moving pretty slow and steady. Nothing unusual about that. But after a few minutes, I realized this thing wasn't behaving like the others. Usually, satellites move in a straight line, pretty predictable. This one slowed down more than just drifting or fading out. It actually stopped, like stopped dead in the sky. I blinked a few times, double-checked my telescope's focus, and it was still there, just hanging in one spot. Then it did something else that threw me off. It shifted direction, just a tiny bit at first, like a slow curve. And then it suddenly picked up speed in a way that made my jaw drop. It accelerated faster than anything I'd ever seen. It was like it went from 0 to God knows how fast in a split second, darting off the way no satellite or plane could. I tried to track it, but my cheap setup couldn't keep up. I lost sight of it almost immediately. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. I kept looking at the spot where it had disappeared, but the sky was empty again, just stars twinkling normally. That's when I noticed something weird about the whole night. The stars looked off, like they were dimmer than usual. It wasn't clouds or anything like that. The sky was clear, but the stars didn't seem as bright as they should be. I checked the time on my phone and realized it was almost an hour later than I thought. That confused me because I swear I had only been watching for maybe 20 minutes. My phone's clock was correct. I double-checked it. I started packing up my gear, feeling a little unsettled. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a faint red glow near the edge of my yard. It wasn't a flashlight or any kind of lamp. It was soft, pulsating, and hovering a few feet off the ground. I blinked, thinking maybe it was some firefly or a reflection from my neighbor's porch light, but there was no porch light on that side. The red glow didn't move like an insect either. It just hovered there, pulsing steadily. I called out to see if anyone was out there, but no answer. After a few seconds, the light vanished, like it was never there. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I checked the news and online forums, expecting maybe someone else had spotted the same thing. Nothing. No reports of any strange lights or satellites going off course. I went back out a few nights later with a friend who's into astronomy more seriously than me. I told him what I saw. He looked at me like I was crazy, but we set up our scopes and cameras anyway. Nothing weird happened that night. Just normal satellites and planes. But when I looked back at my photos from the first night, I noticed something odd. A few of the shots taken right after the object stopped in the sky had strange lines or shadows I couldn't explain. They weren't from the telescope or camera. I checked the gear afterward. I still don't know what I saw that night. I've tried to write it off as a satellite glitch or some kind of light reflection. But that thing stopping and then shooting off like that, it didn't match anything I know about. Sometimes, when I'm outside late, I catch myself staring up, half expecting to see it again. I don't think it was a plane or a drone. It moved too fast, too precisely, and that red light near my yard, that was the weirdest part. It felt like something was watching me or maybe trying to get my attention. But I don't know why. I'm still keeping an eye on the sky though, just in case. I went camping alone last September, just for one night. I needed to clear my head, and the weather was supposed to be decent. Not too cold yet, not a lot of people around. I picked a spot I'd been to once before, about 4 miles into the national forest, just a little off the main trail near a small stream. It wasn't a designated campsite or anything, just flat and quiet and surrounded by trees. No cell service out there, which was part of the appeal. I hiked in late afternoon and got there maybe an hour before sunset. Nothing unusual about the trip in. I passed one couple heading out, but that was it. Once I got to the clearing, I dropped my pack, set up the tent, and gathered some wood for a fire. Nothing fancy, just twigs and some logs that looked dry enough. I had a little folding saw with me, but most of what I used was already on the ground. By the time I got the fire going, it was dark. I had a headlamp on, but mostly sat with it off and watched the fire. Ate a cold sandwich, drank some water, then set up my sleeping bag inside the tent and pulled a couple things out. My jacket, headlamp, a paperback, and my knife, which I usually keep close when I'm out by myself. I remember clearly that I left my bag leaned against a log near the fire, not zipped or anything. My cook set and tarp were still spread out on the other side, kind of where I'd tossed them. I'm not super tidy when I camp alone. I had my boots off near the tent flap and a pair of socks draped over a branch to dry out, just a normal little mess. I didn't stay up that late. The fire burned down and I crawled into the tent around 10, maybe a little later. I remember checking my watch. I read for a few minutes with the headlamp on, then shut it off and laid back. The forest was quiet. Not silent, but that low rustling sound you get from trees shifting and little night insects buzzing. I didn't hear anything weird. I was out cold in less than 10 minutes. I woke up while it was still dark. No idea what time it was. I didn't hear a sound or have a dream or anything. I just opened my eyes and felt off. Not panicked. Not even alert at first. Just unsettled. Like when you forget what day it is and something's not lining up. I laid there listening. The fire had burned out. No breeze. No movement. The quiet felt heavier than before, like I was wearing earplugs. I turned my head toward the tent flap, and I swear it looked brighter outside than it should have. Not moonlight. More like the kind of pale gray you get maybe 10 minutes before dawn. But it wasn't that time yet. I hadn't slept long enough. I sat up and unzipped the flap, still inside my sleeping bag. The sky was overcast, no stars, and that weird gray glow was coming from somewhere off to the right, behind the trees. I didn't see a source, just a faint uniform light like someone had put up a giant lantern behind the forest. I stayed like that for a few minutes, just staring. I don't know why I didn't get up. I didn't even think to grab my knife. I just sat there with the flap open, squinting through the trees, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The light didn't move. It didn't get brighter or dimmer. Eventually, I laid back down, fully clothed, with the zipper only halfway shut. I told myself it was probably headlights from a Forest Service truck or something bouncing off low clouds. It didn't make sense, but I needed to sleep. When I woke up again, the light was gone. Sunlight was coming through the tent. Real sunlight this time. It was around 7 a.m., I think. My first thought was that I must have dreamed the whole thing. But then I stepped out. All my gear was packed. My boots were sitting side by side just outside the flap, socks folded neatly on top. My pack was standing upright by the fire pit, fully zipped with the tarp and cook set inside. My knife was tucked into the side pouch where I always keep it when I'm hiking. My jacket was rolled and strapped to the bottom. Everything was in the exact place it would be if I'd packed it myself, but I hadn't. The fire pit was cold, but clean. The ash had been brushed into a little pile. Even the twigs and wrappers from the sandwich were gone. The log I'd leaned the bag against was bare. The spot looked like no one had even stayed there. I walked the whole perimeter, just in case. No tracks, no prints, no signs that anything had been through. The ground was damp from dew, but not muddy. If someone had been there, I should have seen something. A broken twig, a footprint, anything. But there was nothing. I checked my pack again. Nothing missing, nothing added, no rips or scratches. My food was still sealed. Even the water bottle had the same amount left. It was like someone had just tidied up, tucked everything away the way I would have done it myself. The tent was still standing, but when I looked closer, I saw the stakes had been pulled and laid in a little bundle next to it. The corners of the tent were folded inward, ready to roll up. I don't know how long I stood there staring. It was quiet again, just birds and the wind. The forest looked the same, familiar even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something, like I'd blinked and someone had come and gone without making a sound. I packed the tent the rest of the way and left. The whole hike back, I didn't see a single person. No voices, no distant footsteps, just my own breathing and the crunch of the trail. I didn't even stop for water. I just wanted to be out of there. Back at the car, everything felt normal again. I looked over my shoulder more than once on the drive out, but there was nothing behind me. No vehicles, no signs. When I got home, I dumped my pack out onto the floor. Every piece of gear was there, nothing missing. But when I picked up my book, the one I'd been reading the night before, I noticed something. The bookmark had moved. Not far, just 2 pages ahead. I was working the night shift at the county sheriff's office, driving patrol out in the back roads where the trees crowd close to the dirt and the sky's just black with stars. It was just past midnight when dispatch buzzed me about a car spotted on an old logging road off Highway 47, about 10 miles from the nearest town. The report was vague, car running, headlights on, nobody around. Probably someone stranded or playing dumb, but it was the kind of call you still have to check. I headed out, my cruiser's tires kicking up dust as I peeled off the paved highway and onto the rutted dirt track. The place was dark except for the headlights of the car, a silver sedan sitting halfway off the road, engines still humming, lights bright against the shadows. I killed my cruiser's lights and pulled up behind it, staying a few feet back. I called it in. Unit 42, I've got the car, no driver in sight. The radio crackled back. Copy that. Any sign of the driver? Nope. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was cool, maybe mid-50s, but dry. The only sounds were the distant buzz of insects and the steady hum of the car's engine. No birds or anything, which felt off for this time of year. I walked around the car slow, shining my light through the windows. The interior was empty. No bags, no jackets left behind, just the usual clutter you'd expect in a daily driver. Old receipts, a half-empty water bottle, a pack of gum crushed between the seats. Keys were still in the ignition. That's when I noticed the grass about 20 feet in front of the car. It was flattened in a series of perfect circles, like someone pressed down there but didn't just sit or lie down. The circles were maybe 2 or 3 feet across, perfectly round and scorched brown at the edges, like something hot touched the grass and burned it in those shapes. I scanned the area with my flashlight. The trees around were tall pines, casting long, dark shadows. The dirt road curved off to the left and disappeared into thick woods. I couldn't see footprints near the car or the circles, which was weird since the ground was dry but soft enough to hold prints. I called dispatch again. Dispatch, this is Unit 42. No sign of the driver. There's a cluster of burnt circular marks in the grass near the vehicle. No footprints or tracks leading away. Static on the other end. Understood, Unit 42. Back up en route. I sighed, wiped sweat off my forehead, even though it wasn't hot. The radio went quiet again, except for the faint hum of the car. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong about this scene, like the usual reasons someone would abandon a car. Accident, breakdown, medical emergency, didn't fit. No damage on the car, no evidence the driver was hurt or ran off in a hurry. I stayed near the passenger side, shining my flashlight on the circles. They looked like they were burned from the top down, not just pressed. The grass was crispy, but the soil underneath didn't look disturbed. If someone had been standing there holding something hot, you'd think there would be footprints or some other sign. But nothing. I pulled out my phone to snap pictures. As I raised it, I caught movement in the tree line just beyond the road. A shadow flickered between the trunks, too quick to make out, but definitely there. I dropped my phone to my side and trained the flashlight on the spot. Nothing, just trees and the dark. I tried to tell myself it was a deer or some small animal, but the way it moved was too deliberate for a wild animal. I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't one to spook easily, but out here with just my flashlight and that humming car, it felt like I was being watched. I took a step back toward the cruiser, thinking maybe I'd radio in again or wait for backup with the engine running. But then I heard it, a low vibration, like a distant engine, but not mechanical. It didn't come from the road or the woods. It was just there, underneath everything, almost under the ground. The car's engine sputtered once, then died. The headlights flickered, then went out. Total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely piercing the black. I looked back at the car. The circles in the grass were still there, but now the edges looked like they were glowing faintly, like embers, but cooler with a bluish tint. I called out into the dark. Hello? You out here? No answer. Only the quiet hum that had been there before, but now it seemed louder, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I radioed dispatch again. Unit 42, car just shut off on its own. No response on the radio or phone signal is spotty. Backup ETA 10 minutes. Static again. Then silence. I moved back to the cruiser, double-checked my equipment. My phone showed no signal. I kept trying to call out, but nothing went through. Minutes passed. The humming faded, the faint glow from the circles disappeared. The air felt thick, like it had weight. My fingers started tingling, and my breathing felt heavier than it should. I told myself to stay calm. I was just a guy on patrol. Cars break down. People abandon vehicles for dumb reasons. But the absence of footprints, the burnt circles, the car shutting off all at once, it didn't make sense. I noticed the headlights on the cruiser were dimming too, like the batteries were draining faster than normal. I turned them off and sat inside, locked the doors. I kept scanning the road and tree line, watching for anything moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, the backup finally rolled up, headlights cutting through the dark. They called my radio. Unit 43 here. We're on scene. What's the situation? I explained everything. They looked at the circles in the grass and shook their heads, just as puzzled. One of the deputies called the fire department to check for any chemical or electrical burns. Nothing showed up. We searched the area thoroughly, but found no sign of the driver or any other disturbance. No footprints, no tracks, no campsites. Just that car and those weird scorched circles. We towed the car back to the station, and I stayed with it overnight, watching the footage from my cruiser's dash cam. The recording stopped a few minutes after I arrived at the car. The video flickered, then went to static. I rewound and watched again. Right before it cut out, The camera captured a flash of bright white light from the direction of the circles. I never heard anything else about the driver or that car. The report got filed under abandoned vehicle. I asked around, but nobody reported a missing person matching a description. The whole thing left me with this nagging feeling, like something was there that I couldn't see, like I was being watched the entire time, but by something that didn't want to be found. I still drive that road sometimes, especially late at night, and I swear I catch glimpses of light flickering between the trees. Nothing solid, just shadows and flashes. The circles in the grass never came back, but sometimes I wonder if they're still there, hidden beneath the weeds. I don't know what it was that night. All I know is it wasn't just a car left running with no driver. There was something else out there, something I couldn't explain. And that's the part that stays with me. I was driving home from work one night, about 11:30 p.m. The roads were quiet, just a few cars here and there. I usually keep my phone on silent while I'm driving, but when I pulled into the driveway and grabbed my phone, I saw I had a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but my voicemail list showed it was from my own number. That's when things started to feel weird. I hit play, and it was me. My voice, panicked and confused, talking about a light that won't let me move. I don't remember leaving that message at all. And the weirdest part? There was no call in my recent calls list. No outgoing or incoming call logged, just the voicemail. I sat there on my couch listening again, and it was definitely me. Same voice, same tone, but I had zero memory of it. The message started with me saying, "I don't know what this is. It's just a light. It's right there, and I can't move. It won't let me move. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The way I said it, you could hear how rattled I was. Then it cut out. That was it. I kept replaying it, trying to remember if I'd been messing with my phone or if maybe I'd recorded it accidentally. But nothing clicked. I don't talk in my sleep, and I never make calls or messages without meaning to. Plus, like I said, no call records anywhere. The night before, I remembered, I had gone out for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. It was late, maybe 10 p.m. or so, and the streetlights were dim and sparse. I don't usually do that, but I wanted some fresh air. I never take my phone on those walks, usually leave it inside. But something about that night felt off. When I got to the corner by the park, I noticed this faint glow way off in the distance, near the tree line. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. It wasn't a street lamp, and there were no cars or houses with their lights on there. The glow was pale and steady, almost bluish-white. It didn't flicker or move, just hung there, about the height of a tree. I figured it might be some kind of flashlight or someone's phone light, but I couldn't see anyone around. The park was empty. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the light seemed to follow me. Not by moving closer or anything obvious, but if I stopped and looked, it was always in roughly the same spot relative to me. I felt my skin crawl, like I was being watched. But there was no one there. No footsteps. No sounds. Nothing. Just that light. I hurried back home, doors locked behind me. I told myself it was just some guy messing with a drone or some other prank, but it didn't feel right. That was the last thing I remembered clearly until I heard that voicemail. After hearing the message, I went through my phone settings and checked the audio logs, permissions, anything that might explain how the recording happened, but everything looked normal. No apps were active that could have done it, and I had no reason to record myself like that. I also thought maybe someone hacked my phone and left the message, but that made less sense the more I thought about it. Why record a panicked message in my own voice if they could just call or text me? The next day, I kept thinking about the light and the voicemail. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that same glow in the distance. At work, I was distracted, almost convinced people were watching me, or that something was lurking just out of sight. I kept checking my phone for more strange messages or calls, but nothing. I told a close friend about the voicemail, played it for him, and he looked as confused as I felt. He said maybe it was some kind of glitch or a virus, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I tried to put it behind me, but over the next few days, little things kept piling up. Lights in my house flickered randomly, the TV would turn on by itself for a second, and I could swear I heard a faint humming noise outside my window late at night. I checked outside every time, but never saw anything. One night, I decided to record my own voice, talking about the experience, trying to make sense of it all. When I played it back, the recording had a faint background noise I didn't notice while recording, a low, steady hum, almost like a vibration. It reminded me of the weird light from the park, the one that wouldn't let me move. I went back to the park to see if I could find the light again, but the spot was dark and quiet. No glow, no hum, nothing. Just the usual streetlights and the rustling of trees. I don't know what happened that night or how that voicemail got on my phone. All I know is I heard myself say things I don't remember feeling about something I don't remember seeing. And that light, it's like it left a mark on me, even if I can't explain it. Since then, I keep my phone close and try not to walk alone at night. The voicemail's still there. Sometimes I play it just to remind myself that what happened wasn't all in my head, but I'm not sure I want to hear it too often. I snuck out around 11:45. My mom had gone to bed a little after 10, and my stepdad was passed out in the recliner with the TV still on. I waited until I was sure they weren't going to move again, then slipped out the back door. I didn't even have to be that careful. The floor in our place creaks like crazy, but once they're out, they're out. My plan was simple. Meet up with a few people from school at the usual spot, the old batting cages behind the gas station. It wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk down the back trails, so I didn't bother grabbing anything except my phone and a hoodie. It was a little chilly out, but clear, stars out, and no wind. I was in sneakers, jeans, nothing heavy. The trail cuts behind the water treatment plant, then runs alongside the creek for a while before hitting the fence by the ball fields. It's not lit or anything, but I've walked it a dozen times. I had my phone flashlight on, just pointed at my feet. I made it to the cages around midnight. There were 3 people already there, Jamie, Lex, and a guy named Chris, who I didn't know super well. Someone had a speaker playing music low. We sat around on the broken benches and passed a vape, just talking about nothing. Nobody was drinking or doing anything crazy, just hanging out, killing time. I remember checking my phone at 12:17. I know that because I thought it was funny how specific the time was when I checked. I wasn't in any rush to get home, but I figured I'd dip out by 1. That was kind of my unspoken curfew when I snuck out. If I got back by 1:15 or so, no one noticed. It's what happened on the way back that I can't explain. I said goodbye to the group a little before 12:40. Jamie said something like, "Text when you get in," and I nodded, but I never did. I remember heading back down the trail with my phone still out, light on low. No weird vibes, no one following me. Just quiet and dark like it always is. But somewhere along the trail, I stopped noticing where I was. It didn't feel like I blacked out or anything. I don't think I ever stopped walking. It just felt like I blinked, and I was suddenly aware I wasn't where I thought I should be. The trail looked wrong. Too narrow, maybe. The trees on either side seemed taller, closer together. I stopped walking and turned in a slow circle with my flashlight, trying to figure out how far I'd gone. My heart started racing a little, but I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks. I was probably just off by a few feet, took a wrong turn onto one of the side deer paths. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, really quiet. No bugs, no leaves rustling, nothing. Even the sound of the creek, which I should have been close to, was gone. It was like being in a soundproof room outside. I could hear my own breathing louder than usual. I looked at my phone again to check the time and realized the screen was black. Dead. I hadn't used it much, so it should have still had at least 60% left. I tried holding the power button, nothing. Tapped the screen, nothing. No vibration, no flicker, just dead. I was standing there in the middle of the trail holding this useless phone when I felt something shift. Not saw, not heard, just felt. Like the air around me had moved, but there was no wind, like a pressure change. My ears didn't pop, but it had that kind of vibe. Like when you drive through elevation fast. I turned off the flashlight and just stood there for a second, trying to listen. And that's when I saw a flash of light. not bright, not sudden. It was soft and slow, like a camera flash that didn't quite go off all the way. It came from ahead of me, just barely through the trees, and then disappeared. It didn't light anything up, it just was there for a second, then gone. I waited a bit, didn't move. The air still felt weird, thick maybe. Not warm, not cold, just like I was standing in something, not just air. I started walking again, slowly, not totally sure I was going the right way. I don't know how long I walked after that. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. Time felt wrong. My legs started to hurt a little and my feet were squishing in my shoes. That's when I noticed they were wet. Soaking, actually. I stopped and crouched to touch my jeans. They were wet, halfway up my calves. I ran my hand along the cuff and my fingers came back cold. But the trail hadn't been wet. It hadn't rained. There weren't any puddles. I hadn't crossed the creek. I looked around again and started to feel real off. Not dizzy exactly, more like when you wake up too fast and your stomach drops for a second. I felt like I'd wandered too far into something I wasn't supposed to find. Not in a bad guy in the woods way. More like whatever was around didn't care I was there, but I wasn't meant to be part of it. Then I heard this noise. It wasn't loud. It sounded far off, like a rumble or a generator, but it had a rhythm to it. Not a machine rhythm either, more like breathing, slow, steady, and deep. It came from the same direction I'd seen the light earlier. I didn't go toward it. I don't think I could have made myself if I wanted to. I turned and just walked. Not fast, but steady. I didn't look behind me. I kept my eyes on the ground and just walked. Eventually, the trees started looking familiar again, more spaced out. I recognized a log I jumped over on the way in, and after another few minutes, I saw the water plant's fence. When I finally got to the edge of the neighborhood, the streetlights looked way too bright. I felt like I'd been underground or something. I cut through a couple backyards and made it home without seeing anyone. I didn't even take my shoes off. I went straight to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock on my nightstand said 2:41 a.m. I stared at it for a while. I didn't believe it. There was no way I'd been gone that long. I left the cages around 12:40. The walk back should have taken 15 minutes, 20 max if I was dragging. I plugged in my phone, and it took forever to turn on. When it finally booted, it said the battery was completely drained. No messages, no calls. Nothing between 12:17 and 2:43. My shoes were still soaked. I took them off and dumped water into the trash can. Not a little damp, full-on puddles in the soles. The cuffs of my jeans had this dark grit on them, like sand or really fine gravel. I sniffed the inside of one shoe and it didn't smell like creek water, just off, like old metal or something. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, I didn't feel scared, not exactly. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me. Not followed. Watched. Like I'd wandered through something's space and it had paused, just long enough to notice. The next day I walked the trail again during daylight. The creek was low and dry on both sides of the bridge. No mud, no water. The trail was fine, nothing unusual. I checked my route against a map. There weren't any forks or turns I could have missed. No side trails that loop around. It was like I walked home in a straight line, but took 2 hours to do it. It was a Sunday afternoon in late August, around 6. Hot, not a cloud in the sky. I was flying my drone in the field behind the old quarry, which I'd done a bunch of times before. The spot's kind of perfect. Big open space, no people, no power lines or trees to get in the way. It's technically private land, but no one's used it in years. There's a crumbling gate and some rusted out machinery off to the side, but it's mostly just tall grass and gravel now. I'd been out there for maybe an hour, just getting wide tracking shots and playing with low altitude maneuvers. I'm not a pro or anything, just a guy with a DJI drone and too much free time. I like to fly slow and low and then speed it up in post, so most of what I shoot is pretty basic. At some point, I switched the drone to follow mode and jogged a loop around the field, letting it track me from behind. Everything was normal. After that, I brought it up high, like 300 feet, and just let it hover while I scrolled through some of the shots on the controller. I wasn't looking at the live feed for a minute or two. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead and glancing up at the drone, just this tiny white dot against the blue sky, totally still. Then something flickered on the screen. Not a glitch, not a freeze, just a flash of movement. I tapped to center the camera and saw something dart across the frame from right to left. It was small, but clear. Not a bird, not an insect on the lens. This thing moved too straight and too fast, like it knew exactly where it was going. I thought maybe it was another drone, but I'd have heard it. I spun the camera and tried to follow, but there was nothing for a few seconds. Then it came back. Same object, this time from the opposite direction. But it didn't turn. It just reversed. Like it hit an invisible wall and shot back the way it came. Same speed, no curve or arc. It wasn't banking or tilting like a drone would. It was dead straight. I tapped to track it manually and managed to lock on for maybe 2 seconds. The feed zoomed and centered, and I could see it better. Dull gray, no lights, no rotors, no wings. Just a short cylinder, kind of like a thermos. Then it stopped. Midair. No deceleration, it just froze in place. I stared at the feed, not moving, waiting for it to drop or drift or something. It didn't. It hovered for maybe 3 seconds, still no sound, and then shot straight up. I mean, up. Not at an angle. Directly vertical, like someone dragged it out of the sky with a fishing line. Gone in a second. Into nothing. I looked up physically to see if I could spot it with my eyes, but there was nothing. Just empty sky. I remember looking back at the controller and rewinding the footage, scrubbing through frame by frame. I thought maybe I'd imagined it or it was a glitch in the app, but the footage was clean. You could see it enter, pause, reverse, stop, and vanish. All smooth, no stutter. Then the drone started drifting. Not much, just a foot or two, but it wasn't responding right. I nudged the controls and got nothing for a second, then it jolted sideways. I pulled back to descend and it hesitated again before finally dropping. The lag was bad, like I was losing signal, but the controller said connection was strong. When it got to about 80 feet, it started spinning slowly. I didn't touch the yaw stick, it just started rotating on its own. Not fast, but steady. I tried to correct, and nothing happened. I held the joystick down to land it, and it slowed, then stopped descending completely at maybe 60 feet. Then the screen went black. Not the whole controller, just the video feed. Battery was still good, GPS lock was still green, but the camera feed was gone. I could still hear the drone buzzing overhead, but I couldn't see anything. I waited a second, hoping it would come back. Then I heard something else, not from the drone, on the ground. It sounded like a single step on gravel, maybe 20 feet behind me. Just one. I turned fast, but there was nothing. Just the field, flat and empty. The grass wasn't even moving. No wind. I looked back up, and the drone was still hovering, not spinning anymore, but still stuck. I tried switching to sport mode to force it down faster. Nothing. Still no video feed. Another sound behind me. Same spot. One step. Crunch. I turned again, slower this time, scanning the ground. Still no one. I was alone. I'd parked on the other side of the quarry, maybe a 5-minute walk. No one else's car was there when I came in. I hadn't heard anything the whole time I'd been out. Then I noticed the sound had stopped. Not just the footsteps. Everything. No wind, no birds, no bugs. It was like someone had muted the whole field. I don't know how else to explain it. I could hear the blood in my ears, but nothing else. I looked up again and the drone was descending. Slowly at first, then normal speed. The video feed came back halfway down, fuzzy at first and then clear. It touched down right where it had launched and just sat there. No spinning, no weird movement. I didn't pack up right away. I just stood there with the controller in my hands, listening. The silence held for a few more seconds, then the breeze kicked up again. I heard a crow in the distance. Just like that, everything went back to normal. I turned the drone off and packed it into my case, then walked back to the car a little faster than usual. I didn't play any music on the drive home. I just kept replaying the footage in my head, trying to make sense of it. When I got back, I dumped the files onto my laptop. The footage was all there. The object showed up exactly like I remembered. Fast, smooth, sharp turns with no angle. The vertical shot was the clearest part. It literally went from dead stop to gone in under a second. Frame by frame, it just vanished into the blue. No trail, no distortion, no shadow. Just gone. I checked the telemetry data too. The drone had no errors logged during the spin or the signal loss. Battery voltage stayed normal. Compass didn't spike. It all looked clean. I've gone back to that field since, a few times actually. Never seen anything like that again. Every time I fly now, I keep one eye on the sky and one on the live feed. But it's all been normal. Nothing weird, nothing I couldn't explain. Except for that one day. The power went out around 6:30 that evening. Not all at once either. First the lights flickered a few times, then dimmed, then everything just kind of shut off. No click, no surge, just gone. My wife figured it was the wind. It had been picking up all afternoon and we were used to occasional outages up at the cabin. It's not far from Ashland, but far enough into the woods that the grid can get spotty, especially when the weather gets weird. We weren't that concerned at first. We had flashlights, a battery lantern, and one of those little hand crank radios that also charges phones. The kids thought it was kind of fun. Camping mode, basically. I lit the wood stove, made sure we had enough water set aside just in case, and settled in to wait it out. Around 7:15, my phone lost signal. Not just data, but the bars dropped to 0. That was a little unusual, since we normally got at least 1 or 2 bars even when the weather sucked. I stepped outside to check, holding the phone up like an idiot. Nothing. Just no service. My wife's phone was the same. The kids were watching me through the window, thinking I was being dramatic. I went back in, grabbed the handheld GPS from the gear cabinet. It's one of those basic Garmin models, pretty reliable. We usually used it for hiking. I figured maybe I could get a better sense of what was going on, maybe pick up some coordinates and try to gauge whether it was a local grid issue or something broader. The GPS wouldn't lock. It turned on fine, battery was full, but it just sat on the loading screen. Acquiring satellites. That part can take a minute in dense woods, but we weren't deep in the trees. The cabin sits in a clearing about half an acre wide. I gave it 5 minutes. Still nothing. No satellites found. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and noticed the compass needle spinning. We keep a few old-school magnetic compasses in the cabinet too, just as backup. I'd pulled one out alongside the GPS. The needle was slowly turning clockwise, not snapping to north like it should have. I figured maybe the GPS was interfering, so I set them apart. No change. I pulled out a second compass, different model, different brand, same thing. The needle pointed southeast for a second, then twitched and drifted to the east, then wobbled again. I checked both against the big map we keep mounted on the wall, just to see if maybe the storm had thrown off something magnetic. But even the big orienteering compass in the emergency kit was acting weird. All of them were slowly drifting, and I noticed something else. They were all settling in the same direction, not north. Not even consistent with each other at first. But after a few minutes, every needle had drifted to point, roughly, toward the woods behind the cabin. Not the trailhead either, the deep part. The thick trees we never let the kids play near because it gets marshy and dense and just sort of strange after a certain point. I didn't say anything right away. My wife was trying to get the lantern to stop flickering and the kids were getting antsy. I put the compasses down and double-checked the windows and doors, mostly just out of habit. It wasn't late yet, but the sky had gone that cloudy gray where you couldn't tell what time it really was. By 8, it was dark. No moon, no stars. We should have at least seen the town lights over the ridge, or a plane or something. It was just black outside. Dead quiet, too. No frogs, no wind. Even the trees had gone still. I went out onto the porch with the flashlight, trying not to look like I was checking for anything. I scanned the tree line, then looked back at the house and froze. All 3 compasses were on the table inside, right where I left them, but they weren't pointing in the same direction anymore. They had shifted. Not wildly, just maybe 10 or 15 degrees to the left. Still pointing toward the woods, but not the same spot as before. I went back in and turned off the lantern for a second, just to look. Out the back windows, there was nothing. No lights, no movement. Just the silhouette of the trees. I stared at the edge of the forest for a while, thinking maybe I'd see headlights or a flashlight, something to explain why everything felt so weirdly heavy. But there was nothing. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't at the front door. It was on the back wall. Not the door, just the wall. One knock. Not loud. Not even really forceful. Just a dull tap, like someone knocked with their knuckles once and then waited. I stood there, staring at the wall. My wife looked up from the couch, confused. She heard it too. I didn't move. Neither did she. A few seconds later, another knock. This one closer to the window. I grabbed the flashlight again, ran to the back door, yanked it open, and shined the light across the porch and into the yard. Nothing. No footprints in the snow, no shapes in the trees, just stillness. I stepped out and turned in a slow circle, watching for any movement. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. That pressure, like something was just outside the range of the flashlight, like it should have been visible, but wasn't. I backed inside, locked the door, and this time I told my wife. I told her about the compasses, the GPS, the knock. We kept our voices low, mostly because the kids were starting to notice that something was off. I tried calling 911, but the phone still had no signal. Even the emergency feature wouldn't connect. Just a dead screen. At 9:12, all the compasses shifted again. I wrote it down on a notepad because it felt important. They all turned maybe 20 degrees, still pointing into the woods, but now toward the left of the clearing. My wife watched them with me. She didn't say anything, just kept glancing at the windows. At 9:38, the GPS pinged once. Just for a second. A single green bar lit up, then vanished. The screen said position locked, then blinked back to acquiring satellites. I checked the coordinates it had briefly displayed. Something about them didn't make sense. I looked them up later. They weren't where we were, not even close. The GPS had for about 3 seconds thought we were about 6 miles southeast, near a stretch of woods with no roads, no trails, and no structures. After that, the batteries in both the GPS and the lantern started draining fast. The lantern dimmed, the GPS shut off. I checked the kids' walkie-talkies. Dead too, not low. Just dead. Like the batteries had been yanked out. I opened the backs. The batteries were still there, snug in their slots, brand new ones. I tested them later. They were fine. At 10, the lights came back on. No warning. Just everything humming to life like nothing had happened. The phones got signal again. The landline rang twice, then went quiet. Nobody was on the other end. The GPS booted up and locked in immediately. The coordinates were normal again. The compasses, though, that's the part that stuck with me. They didn't correct. Even after the power came back, even with everything else working, the compass needles still pointed toward the woods. Not magnetic north, just that same spot. The next morning, I took a walk out that way, past the clearing into the woods. The compasses kept pointing me deeper in. I followed the bearing for maybe half a mile, then stopped. There was nothing there. No trail, no clearing, no signs of anyone having passed through. Just trees. But the air felt off, still, charged. I turned around and went home. I didn't take the kids back out there after that. We started using a different cabin the next summer. The old one's still there, still in good shape, but we haven't stayed overnight again. I went camping alone last fall. It wasn't anything new. I do solo trips pretty often, usually late in the season when the parks are empty. I like the quiet, and I know how to take care of myself. I had the gear, the maps, the food, the emergency beacon. It wasn't reckless. This was in northern Arizona, near the Mogollon Rim. There's a spot I go to that's off one of those rough forest roads, unpaved, lots of washboarding, not well traveled. You wouldn't stumble on it by accident. I picked it because it's remote, but not inaccessible. No cell service, but that's normal out there. I got in around 4 in the afternoon. It was a little cloudy, but dry. I set up camp maybe 50 yards off the road, near a line of trees, but with a good view of the sky. There was a fire ring someone had built already, and I gathered a decent stack of wood. The usual stuff: pitch some logs, cook dinner, make some tea, watch the stars come out. I remember hearing a few animals early on, small things moving in the brush, but nothing that made me uneasy. Around 10, I doused the fire, brushed my teeth, and got in the tent. It was a still night, no wind, just that constant hush of the trees and the occasional owl. I read for a while on my Kindle, then went to sleep. I woke up around 2:30. No noise woke me. I just opened my eyes. My mouth was dry, and I had that weird feeling you get sometimes where you don't know what time it is, but something feels off. The tent was cold, colder than it had been when I went to bed. I listened for a while. It was dead silent. I sat up and unzipped the tent flap halfway. I could see my firewood pile in the glow of the moonlight, maybe 10 feet from the tent. But something was wrong with it. At first I thought an animal had messed with it, scattered it maybe. But when my eyes adjusted, I saw it wasn't scattered. The wood was arranged into a shape. It was a spiral. Not just a messy swirl. This was clean, careful. Every log and stick laid down flat in a clockwise spiral, tight and symmetrical, starting from the center and curving outward like a snail shell. The logs I'd stacked against the tree earlier were gone. Everything I'd gathered was in the spiral. It wasn't possible. I would have heard something. I'm a light sleeper out there. Plus, the dirt around the fire ring was soft and dry. If someone had walked up to my tent, I would have seen footprints. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out barefoot, just in my base layers. The air was freezing. I circled the spiral, shining the light low. The ground around it was smooth. No tracks, not from boots, not from paws, not even mine. Just undisturbed dirt and that perfect shape in the middle of it. I checked the tree line. Nothing. Just black trees and silence. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't panicking exactly, but something about it felt wrong. It was like seeing something where it shouldn't be. Like walking into your kitchen and finding every cabinet open and all the silverware arranged by size on the floor. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, scanning the woods, trying to convince myself it was some weird prank or animal behavior I hadn't heard of. But no animal makes shapes like that. And no person would go through the trouble of arranging firewood into a spiral in total silence without leaving prints and not take anything or damage anything else. Eventually, I broke the spiral apart. I don't know why. It just felt like it shouldn't stay that way. I didn't restack it the way I had before. I just kicked it apart and dragged the bigger logs back into a pile near the fire ring. Then I got back in the tent and zipped it up tight. I stayed awake until dawn, just lying there listening. Still no sounds, not even wind. At some point I realized I hadn't heard a single insect or night bird since I woke up. When the sun came up, I packed everything. I wasn't supposed to leave until the next day, but I didn't care. I didn't eat. Just broke camp, checked the site to make sure I wasn't leaving anything, and got in the car. Right before I pulled onto the road, I walked back over to where the spiral had been. The dirt was still smooth. No prints. Like nothing had happened, like I'd imagined it, but I hadn't. The logs were still in a loose pile where I'd kicked them, not stacked like they were the night before. Something had moved them, and it hadn't made a sound. I was out driving late that night, chasing a thunderstorm that was rolling through the area. I'm into storm photography. Nothing professional, just a hobby. I like how unpredictable it is, how the sky suddenly lights up and changes. The roads were mostly empty and the air smelled like rain. The kind of night where everything feels quiet except for the low rumble of thunder in the distance. I pulled over on the side of a country road with my camera and tripod. The storm was about 10 miles away, moving toward me slowly. I set up my gear and started taking pictures, focusing on the flashes of lightning that cracked the clouds open. I was shooting in intervals, trying to catch the bright strikes that would light up the whole sky. After about an hour, I packed up and headed back home. I was tired, but satisfied, thinking I'd gotten some good shots. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was reviewing the photos on my computer, that I noticed something strange. There were 3 frames, all taken within a few minutes of each other, where a dark shape appeared in the clouds. It wasn't like a normal cloud shadow or a bird. It was an angular shape, almost like a distorted rectangle or a block hanging in the sky. The edges were sharp, not soft like clouds. It was black against the lighter background, and it seemed to float there in the middle of the storm. I went back to the original files and zoomed in, trying to see if it was just a glitch or some kind of lens artifact, but it was consistent across the 3 pictures, taken seconds apart from slightly different angles. And the weirdest part was, I didn't notice it at all when I was out there. I was staring at the sky for hours, watching the lightning, but this shape never caught my eye. I showed the photos to a few friends who do photography, and some thought it might be a camera artifact or a reflection inside the lens. But it didn't look like any flare or lens ghosting I'd seen before, and it didn't change or move between shots, it just stayed in the same spot. That day, I kept thinking about it and went back over the pictures frame by frame, trying to find any hint of movement or explanation. Nothing. The shape was just there. The clouds moved around it, lightning flashed nearby, but it stayed the same, like it was suspended in the sky, completely still. I decided to go back to the spot where I'd been photographing the storm, just to see if there was anything odd in the area. Maybe some weird atmospheric condition or something on the road that could explain what I'd seen. When I got there during the afternoon, the sky was clear and there was nothing unusual. Just trees, fields, and the usual sounds of birds. I walked around the area, checking the horizon, scanning the treetops, but everything looked normal. No strange structures or anything that could create shadows or reflections like in the photos. It was just a typical rural stretch. That night, I thought maybe I'd try photographing again. I went back out, set up in the same spot, hoping to catch something else or maybe figure out if it was a one-time thing. The storm came and went, and this time I didn't see or capture anything like that shape. The lightning flashed normally, the clouds rolled in patterns I recognized, and no strange shapes showed up. I checked my gear too, looking for anything that might cause weird images. The lens was clean, no scratches or damage. The camera settings were the same as usual. Everything looked normal. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. That shape didn't look natural, and I'm pretty familiar with clouds and storms. It was out of place, but at the same time, it wasn't like it was glowing or moving or doing anything active. It just existed there in those frames. I kept going back to the photos, noticing small things I hadn't before. The way the lightning illuminated the edges of the shape, just slightly, but only on some sides, like it was partially blocking the light. Sometimes it looked like there was a faint outline of something extending down from it, but the darkness around it made it hard to tell. I didn't tell many people about it, mostly because I wasn't sure what to say. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to crazy conclusions, and I don't like sounding paranoid. But I kept that shape in the back of my mind, the way it hovered in the clouds without explanation. A few weeks later, I was at a local coffee shop, showing a friend the pictures on my phone. He's into local news and weird stuff and got really interested when I showed him the frames. He asked if I'd checked with any weather stations or radar data from that night. I hadn't, so I looked up the radar archives. The storm was real, moving as expected, no odd signals or blips that night. Nothing reported in that area that would hint at something strange. Still, the shape remained. It wasn't just in my head or a camera malfunction. I had 3 clear frames of it and I couldn't explain it. Sometimes I wondered if it was some kind of drone or experimental aircraft, but nothing about it suggested normal aviation. No lights, no sound when I was out there, and no movement. Other times I thought maybe it was some kind of optical illusion created by the storm itself, an odd cloud formation or shadow from another cloud layer. But I've been watching storms for years, and this was different, too defined, too solid looking. In the end, I didn't get any answers. The photos stayed on my hard drive, and I never saw anything like that shape again. Every now and then I go back and stare at those frames, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or a lens glitch, but I'm not sure. It's just there, 3 images of a black, angular shape floating silently in the storm clouds, showing up in the middle of a lightning chase on a quiet country road. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. It was around 9:30 on a Thursday night. I was out back, just sitting in a lawn chair, sipping a weak bourbon and watching the sky. I'd been retired a couple years by then, used to work air traffic control at a regional airport in New Mexico. Nights like that were how I like to unwind. No screens, no phone, just the sky and the quiet. The neighborhood's pretty dead after sunset. Most folks keep to themselves. No streetlights behind the house, that just open sky and some low hills in the distance. There was barely any wind that night, just enough to rustle the trees a little, but not much else. Clear sky, too. Not a cloud in sight. I remember that detail because I was trying to spot satellites. I'd seen 3 or 4 pass over already, and I was just scanning lazily when I noticed this shape, way out, almost directly overhead, but slightly to the west. First, I thought it was a large bird gliding, maybe a hawk or an owl, but the way it moved caught me off guard. It was big, for one thing, and the silhouette wasn't right for a bird. It had this sharp, wide boomerang shape, not curved like a typical wing, more like two long wedges joined in the middle. And it was dark. I mean, really dark, blacker than the sky behind it. No reflection, no shimmer, no navigation lights, nothing. It just sort of blocked the stars as it passed in front of them. That's what made me look closer. One second there were stars, next second there weren't, then they reappeared as it moved. What struck me most was how slow it was going, and how smooth. It didn't glide like an aircraft. No wobble, no tilt, just a flat, steady drift, almost like it was coasting on rails. And the wind that night, what little there was coming from the northeast. This thing was moving south-southeast, cutting against the wind. I sat there watching it for maybe 15-20 seconds. Enough time to convince myself it wasn't a drone or balloon or bird. I kept waiting to hear something, engine hum, wind rush, anything, but there was nothing, completely silent. I stood up at some point without realizing it. I just found myself on my feet, staring at this thing. It wasn't huge like a jumbo jet or anything, but definitely bigger than any drone I've seen. At that altitude, maybe a few hundred feet up, it had to be at least 30 or 40 feet across. Then it just faded. It didn't speed up, didn't bank or climb. Just kept its path and slowly faded until I couldn't see it anymore. Like someone was turning down the brightness on it. The stars behind it came back into view, and it was gone. I stood there for a long time, not moving, trying to make sense of it. I knew what aircraft looked like at night. I'd spent 30 years watching radar, guiding planes in and out of airspace. I could tell a chopper from a Cessna by sound alone. This thing didn't fit anything I knew. I didn't tell my wife right away. She was inside watching some true crime thing and would have just rolled her eyes. So I sat back down and stared at the sky, hoping maybe I'd see it again. I didn't. But something weird happened about 10 minutes later. I heard this faint humming, not mechanical, more like a low resonance you feel in your chest more than your ears. It came in short waves, maybe 5 or 6 seconds apart. Low, then gone, then low again. No direction to it, just there. I turned around, looked at the house, the hills, the trees, no sign of anything, but I could feel it. Like when a big truck rolls by a few streets away and the ground hums for a second, that kind of feeling. Then it stopped. No fade out, just stopped. I remember my chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I didn't feel good either. Off balance, maybe. Unsettled. I went back inside and sat in the kitchen. Didn't turn on the lights. Just sat there for a while, staring out the window. I wanted to write it down or sketch it, but I didn't know how. The shape was simple enough, but the way it moved, slow, silent, wrong, I couldn't get that part down. Later that night, when I finally got in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about radar. There'd been no sound, no contrail, no lights, but I kept wondering if anything had shown up on any of the local scopes. Civilian air traffic wouldn't pick up something without a transponder, but some of the military installations out here run passive systems too. They don't always light things up, but they listen. I had a couple contacts still working out near Cannon. Thought about calling one, but I didn't. Didn't feel like getting laughed at. Next night, I sat out again. Same time. Different drink. I watched the sky for hours, barely blinked. Nothing came. But the next morning, I found something strange out by the fence line. There's this old stretch of wire fencing along the back of the property, not used for anything anymore. Half fallen down in spots. I was out there checking on a broken post, and I found 3 little impressions in the dirt, all spaced evenly, maybe a foot apart, almost like tripod feet, but narrow and pointed. Not deep, just shallow presses in the soil, no sign of what made them, no footprints, no tire tracks, just those 3 marks in a triangle. Looked fresh, too. The ground was dry, but the edges of the prints hadn't crumbled yet. They hadn't been there the day before. I would have seen them. I bent down and touched the center of the triangle. The soil felt colder. Not ice cold, just cooler than everything around it. That could have been nothing, maybe just shade from a bush nearby. But it stuck with me. I didn't say anything to anyone about that either. A few days later, I was driving into town, heading east. It was just after sunset, sky still blue, but fading. As I rounded this long curve, I caught a glimpse of something off to my right, just above the ridgeline. Not moving, just hanging there. I only saw it for a second before the trees blocked my view. By the time I got clear, it was gone. I pulled over, got out, stared at the horizon for a good 10 minutes. Nothing came back. It wasn't the same shape, not boomerang. More like a flat disc, but it could have been a trick of the light. Hard to tell. I never reported it. Things went back to normal after that. Nothing else strange. No more sightings. No sounds. Just quiet. But sometimes when I sit out back and the wind dies down, I look up and wonder if I'll see it again. And I wonder how long it had been there before I noticed it. How long it might have been watching. I was somewhere west of Kearney, Nebraska, when I first noticed the lights. It was a little after 3 in the morning. I'd been on the road since around 9 the previous night, hauling refrigerated freight from Indianapolis to Salt Lake. Pretty standard run. I usually take I-80 the whole way, long, straight, boring. I prefer it that way. I was in the middle of that dead stretch between towns where everything's just fields and sky. Not even billboards, just the occasional mile marker and the hum of the tires. I wasn't tired exactly. I'd had coffee in Grand Island, but I was zoning a bit. Cruise control was on, AM talk radio, turned down low, the kind of driving where you stop thinking about what you're doing. I only noticed the lights because they didn't move. They were behind me at first. I caught them in the mirrors. 3 white dots, all the same size, same brightness, spaced evenly apart. Not headlights. That was my first thought. Maybe a truck with weird running lights or someone hauling something unusual. But they were too high. Not above me, just higher than any headlights would be. At first, I figured maybe it was a plane, something banking slow or coming into alignment. But they stayed the same distance back, mile after mile. If it was a plane, it was keeping pace perfectly. After about 15 minutes, I started really watching. The spacing between them never changed. No blinking, no red or green nav lights, just white, like stars but too low and too bright for stars with the moon out. They weren't moving forward, just floating back there. I tapped the brakes once lightly, not enough to slow down much, just enough to see if they'd respond. Nothing changed. They held position, maybe half a mile back and slightly off the road to the left. No sound either. I rolled the window down to listen, but all I heard was wind and the highway. It started bothering me. I'm used to weird stuff on the road. People driving without lights, deer standing in the middle of nowhere, even drones once or twice. But this felt different. There was no behavior I could match it to. If it was a plane, why stay fixed behind me for that long? If it was a drone, who was flying it in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m.? I passed an exit, just one of those little county roads with no services. I thought about pulling off, seeing if they followed. But I kept going. The thought of stopping didn't sit right with me. I don't know why, just felt wrong. After another 20 minutes, they were still there. I got this idea to flash my high beams. Not in any pattern, just quick on and off to see if they'd react. Nothing, not even a flicker. I kept checking the mirrors every 30 seconds. Sometimes I'd lose them when the road curved a little or dipped. But as soon as it leveled out again, there they were, perfectly spaced. At some point I looked at the dash clock. It was 4:06. I remember because I'd told myself I'd stop at the next decent truck stop after 4. I passed a rest area sign not long after that, but again, I didn't stop. The lights were still there, and I didn't like the idea of getting out of the cab. Then they moved. I was glancing in the left mirror when it happened. 1 second they were behind me, same position as always. The next second, they shot sideways, not forward, not toward me, sideways, all 3 at the same time, like they were locked together. No arc, no build-up, just a straight horizontal shift across the sky, way faster than anything I've ever seen. They went from behind me to out over the open fields at maybe a 45-degree angle from the truck. Then they stopped again. I slowed down, actually hit the brakes this time. They stayed put, not jittering or adjusting, just stopped like before. And then Maybe 10 seconds later, they zipped again. Straight up. Gone. Not faded. Just gone. I pulled over onto the shoulder, sat there with the engine idling, 4 ways on, just looking out over the fields. There was nothing. No sound, no motion, just the faint orange glow of the instrument panel and the crunch of gravel under the tires. I got out and walked a little ways from the truck. No traffic in either direction. Nothing overhead. Sky was totally clear. Moon to the west, stars out everywhere else. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, not really expecting them to come back, just trying to make sense of it. Then I heard the engine stutter. I turned back, thinking maybe I'd accidentally tapped the key or the gear shift. But I was still in neutral, brakes set. The lights on the dash flickered once, then everything was normal again. I climbed back in, shut the door, and drove the rest of the way to North Platte without stopping. Never saw the lights again. I checked the mirrors more than usual that night. We'd been staying at this old cabin way out in the woods for a few days. Just me, my wife Sarah, and our dog Max. The kind of place with no cell service, no neighbors for miles, just trees and silence. We'd gone there to get away from everything, you know? No distractions, no noise, just us in the forest. The night before all this happened was quiet. We went to bed early, tired from hiking during the day. Max curled up at the foot of the bed like usual. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, that feeling like nothing could go wrong out there. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night because I felt weird. Like something was off, but I couldn't tell what. The room was darker than I expected. I reached over to check the clock on my phone, but there was no signal and the screen was black. I glanced towards Sarah, who was still asleep. Max was there too, lying down like nothing was happening. I tried to go back to sleep, but the feeling didn't go away. Eventually, I got up to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I noticed it. Everything was wrong. The furniture wasn't where we left it. The couch had been shifted about 4 feet closer to the window. The coffee table was flipped sideways. Chairs were pushed out of place. Even the small bookshelf against the wall was turned, like someone had spun it 90 degrees. Nothing was broken, nothing was damaged, but the whole living room looked like someone had been there moving stuff around. I went back to the bedroom and woke Sarah. She rubbed her eyes, sat up, and gave me that look like I was nuts. I explained what I'd seen and she agreed something was off. We both checked the rest of the cabin. The kitchen table was rearranged, the chairs weren't where we'd left them, even the stove knobs were turned slightly, like someone had fiddled with them. What really freaked me out was that nothing was missing or out of place in terms of the small stuff. No doors open, no windows broken, no footprints or signs of forced entry anywhere. The front door was locked tight, the back door was locked. We double-checked before bed. Max hadn't moved from the foot of the bed the entire time. He looked completely normal. No barking, no growling, just sleeping like nothing had happened. I walked outside to look around the cabin. The yard was undisturbed. No tracks, no signs of anyone approaching. The forest was quiet, eerily so, with no wind or animal sounds. I noticed that the night air felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath or something. Sarah and I started trying to figure out if we'd just forgotten where we put the furniture. But no, it was obvious. We remembered exactly where everything had been. The couch never moved before, and the coffee table especially. We're not kids. We aren't rearranging furniture in the middle of the night without realizing it. We spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening for anything. Nothing. No footsteps outside, no creaks inside, no sounds at all, except Max's steady breathing. The next morning, sunlight came through the windows, and the cabin looked normal again. We checked the furniture one more time. It was still in those strange positions. I started snapping pictures with my phone, just to have some record. We joked half-heartedly about ghosts or something, but it wasn't funny. The weirdest part was how calm Max was. Normally, if there's anything strange going on, he's the first to freak out, but he just stayed there, like nothing was wrong. We decided to pack up and leave a day early. Driving away, I kept glancing back toward the cabin in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the tree line, but when I blinked, it was gone. That's it. Nothing else happened, but I still don't know what to make of it. No forced entry, no damage, no footprints, no sign anyone was there. Yet somehow, someone or something had been inside, moving things around without waking us or Max. I still wonder if it was real or just some weird dream I had while half asleep. But the furniture was there when I got up, and Max, he'd never stay that calm if something was normal. I'd been hiking alone for a few hours, just me and the trail. It was late summer, early evening, the kind of time when the sun's starting to dip, but there's still plenty of light. I was heading up this ridge in a national forest I'd been to before. Nothing too wild, but remote enough that I didn't expect to see anyone else. I just needed to get away from everything for a while. The hike itself wasn't anything special. The usual birds calling, the wind through the pines, the buzz of insects. I remember thinking how nice it was that the weather held up, no rain in sight. I kept a steady pace, stopping now and then to catch my breath or look back at the valley below. The air smelled like pine needles and dirt, and the light was softening as the sun sank lower. When I finally got close to the top of the ridge, something felt off. I was used to a bit of wind there. Ridges catch the breeze, and usually you get birds circling overhead or a squirrel or two darting through the trees. But this time, none of that was happening. I stopped and looked around, expecting to hear at least the usual ambient sounds of the forest. Nothing. No wind rustling the leaves, no birds chirping or calling, no insects buzzing or crawling. Just silence. Dead silence. The kind that's too complete, the kind that makes your ears ring a little because your brain is desperate for something to focus on. At first, I thought maybe it was just a calm moment, like a lull before a storm or something. So I stood there for a minute, trying to listen. That's when I noticed a faint hum. It was barely there at first, almost like white noise, but then it got clearer. The weird part was that it wasn't coming from any one direction. It filled the air evenly, like the whole ridge was humming. I put my hand over my mouth, hoping to block out the sound and maybe focus on natural noise again, but the hum didn't go away. It felt low and steady, vibrating through the air. The strange thing was the way it affected me physically. I felt this weird buzzing in my teeth, like the fillings in my molars were vibrating in sync with the hum. It was subtle at first, then got stronger, and honestly, a little uncomfortable. I'm not one to freak out easily, but I was starting to feel uneasy. I scanned the ridge around me. The trees were still, the sky was clear, and there was no sign of animals anywhere. Usually, even if you don't see wildlife, you hear something. A bird flapping, a chipmunk running, a branch cracking. But here, it was just that hum and this unsettling quiet. I pulled out my phone to check the time and see if maybe there was some kind of weather alert or something weird reported. No notifications, no unusual weather conditions, nothing. Signal was weak, but still there, which surprised me given how remote this spot was. I took a couple of tentative steps forward, planning to crest the ridge and keep going. But the moment I moved, the hum seemed to pulse a little louder. My teeth started buzzing again, stronger this time, and I felt this pressure building in my head. I stopped, hoping it was just in my imagination. That's when I noticed something else. The usual sense of space was off. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it was like the air itself felt heavier, thicker, like walking through water, except there was no water anywhere. I looked down at the ground, but the dirt and rocks looked normal, no strange markings, no discoloration. I tried calling out just a quick hello to see if anyone was nearby. No answer, no echo, no sound returning from the trees or valley below, just silence. It got harder to stand still. The hum was constant now, filling my head, making it hard to focus. My teeth hurt a little from the vibration, and I felt dizzy. I thought about sitting down to wait it out, but I didn't want to get stuck up there. Something about the silence felt wrong. I started heading back down the trail, slow and cautious. As I descended, the usual sounds started creeping back in. At first, a distant bird call, then the rustle of leaves as a breeze picked up again. The hum faded gradually, like someone was turning down a volume knob. My teeth stopped buzzing, and the pressure in my head lifted. When I reached the base of the ridge, everything was back to normal. The forest sounded alive again, bugs chirping, birds singing, the wind whispering through the trees. I checked the timestamp on my phone. About 20 minutes had passed since I got to the top of the ridge, but the feeling of that silence and hum stayed with me. I told a few people later, but they just laughed it off. Must have been your ears, or probably some weird radio interference. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all in my head. But something about that spot on the ridge felt off, like a place caught between two worlds or something. I haven't been back since. Not yet.